Hello and welcome to the Pixel Dreams Sleep channel, where we tell stories about myths and monsters to help you drift off to sleep. If you like our channel, please like and subscribe. And now we're off to a place where myths and monsters rule, and sleep comes to those who listen. In the deepest parts of the ancient woods, where sunlight filters through a canopy centuries old, there exists a way of life that few outsiders have ever witnessed. The forest elves do not build their homes as we might imagine. They do not carve out clearings or construct walls that separate inside from outside. No, for the forest elves, the entire woodland is home. Every moss-covered stone, every whispering stream, every hollow beneath an old oak's roots, all of it is home. Imagine walking through such a forest. The air is cool and carries the scent of earth and green growing things. Somewhere nearby, water trickles over smooth pebbles. And though you see no buildings, no roads, no signs of habitation, you are standing in someone's home. You simply don't know how to recognize it yet. The forest elves learned long ago that the woods themselves were wiser than any architect. Why impose rigid structures upon a landscape that already breathes with life? Instead, they learned to listen, to watch, to understand how the forest wanted to be lived in. Their villages, if you can call them that, are hidden in plain sight. Some dwellings are grown rather than built. A young elf might find a pair of saplings growing close together and, over decades, guide their growth with gentle encouragement and patient magic. The trees respond, bending and weaving, until their trunks and branches form walls and a roof. Windows appear where the elf whispered to gaps in the leaves. A doorway emerges where two roots never quite touch the ground. This is not quick work. An elf's home might take 50 years to grow properly. But what is 50 years to a being who will see 500? And when the home is finally complete, it lives and breathes. Its walls are not dead timber but living wood. In spring, flowers might bloom along the doorframe. In autumn, the roof glows gold and amber before settling into winter's sleep. Other elves prefer the embrace of the ancient trees, the grandfather oaks and grandmother willows whose trunks are wide enough to hold chambers within. These trees are never cut or harmed. Instead, the elves find the hollow places that time and weather have already created. A lightning strike from a century past might have left a cavity in a trunk. A branch long fallen might have left an opening. The elves simply discover these spaces and make them comfortable with moss and woven grass, with shelves of fungus that grows naturally from the bark. To sleep in such a place is to hear the heartbeat of the tree itself, the slow circulation of sap, the creaking of ancient wood, the rustle of leaves far above, singing you their lullaby. You are not separate from the forest when you sleep there. You are held within it, cradled by something far older and more patient than yourself. And then there are those who make their homes beneath the roots. If you've ever seen the root system of an old tree, exposed by erosion or storm, you know how they twist and arch, creating caves and tunnels in the earth. The elves know these secret places. They find where the roots have left just enough space for a small dwelling. They line these underground homes with soft materials, dry leaves, the silver-white fluff from certain seeds, woven grasses that never seem to mildew in the darkness. These below-ground homes stay warm in winter and cool in summer. They are safe from storms and hidden from any who might wish the elves harm. And there is something deeply restful about sleeping beneath the earth, protected by the roots of an ancient tree. The darkness is complete and soft. The silence is profound, broken only by the occasional settling of soil or the distant sound of an underground stream. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about these elven dwellings is that they are nearly impossible to find if you don't know where to look. A human might walk past a tree home and see only a tree. They might step over a root door and never notice the carefully hidden entrance. The elves do not mark their territories with signs or fences. They do not cut paths that announce, "Here is where we live." Instead, the forest looks untouched, wild, as it has always been. And that is precisely how the elves want it. This is because the forest elves do not see themselves as separate from their environment. They are not visitors or conquerors or even stewards. They are simply part of the forest, the way a fox is part of the forest, or a fern, or a spider spinning its web between branches. They belong there because they have never tried to make the forest belong to them. On quiet evenings, when the last light fades from between the trees, you might see soft glows appearing here and there throughout the woods. Not fires, which are used sparingly and with great care, but gentler lights. Certain mushrooms that glow with a pale blue luminescence. Captured fireflies in translucent vessels made from hollowed acorns. Flowers that release a faint phosphorescence as the dew settles on their petals. These lights mark the places where elves are settling in for the night. A glow here, beneath that spreading oak. Another there, high in the branches of a pine. Another emerging from beneath a tumble of moss-covered stones. The forest becomes a constellation, a mirror of the stars appearing above the canopy. And as the elves prepare for sleep, the forest prepares with them. The daytime birds fall silent. The night creatures begin their gentle stirring. The wind softens to a whisper. And everything settles into the ancient rhythm that has guided this woodland for thousands upon thousands of years. This is what it means to live in the forest as the elves do. Not to build upon it or even within it, but to become part of its dreaming. To make your home so gently that the forest barely notices you are there, until you and the forest are dreaming the same dream together. And in that dream, there is no separation between the dwelling and the dweller, between the forest and the folk who call it home. There is only the endless green growing, the patient wisdom of ancient trees, and the soft sound of breathing, elf and forest together, as the stars will slowly overhead and the night deepens into perfect, peaceful rest. There is a connection between the forest elves and their woodland home that goes deeper than simply living among the trees. It is not enough to say they love the forest, though they do. It is not even enough to say they understand it, though their understanding runs profound. No, the relationship is something more intimate than that. The forest elves feel the woods. They sense it the way you might sense your own body, aware of its wellness or its pain, its comfort or its distress. Imagine for a moment that you could feel the forest as a living presence. Not just observe it, but experience it from within, as though the boundary between yourself and the woodland had become beautifully, mysteriously thin. On a morning when the forest is healthy and whole, an elf wakes with a sense of deep contentment. It's not quite an emotion of their own, but something shared. The feeling of sun-warming leaves. The satisfaction of roots drinking from soil rich with last night's rain. The quiet joy of a seedling pushing through the earth for the first time, unfurling tiny leaves toward the light. All of this washes through the elf's awareness like a gentle tide, like waking in a room filled with golden sunlight. They might walk through the woods on such a day and feel the forest's vitality in their very bones. Each breath they take seems to fill them not just with air, but with life itself. The green smell of growing things. The songs of birds that are, in some way, the forest singing. The rustling of small creatures in the undergrowth, each one a note in a vast, living symphony. This is what it means to feel the forest when all is well. To experience its moods as weather passing through your own heart. The drowsy contentment of a warm afternoon. The fresh excitement of spring's first thaw. The deep, settling peace of a winter's night when snow muffles all sound and the woods rest beneath their white blanket. But this connection, beautiful as it is, carries a weight that few others could bear. Because if the elves can feel the forest's joy and health, they can also feel its suffering. And that suffering is not abstract or distant. It is immediate. It is personal. It is pain. When a tree is cut without need or gratitude, the elves feel it. Not as a thought or an idea, but as sensation. A sudden jarring, a wrongness, as though part of themselves has been severed. Some say it's like a sharp intake of breath that won't quite resolve. Others describe it as a hollow ache, a space where something living should be but now is not. A single tree, cut carelessly, might cause one elf to pause in their work, hand going to their chest, brow furrowing as they turn toward the direction of the disturbance. They know, without being told, that something has been lost. They feel the silence where the tree's slow, patient consciousness used to be. But when the destruction is greater, when fire sweeps through the forest or poison seeps into the streams, the pain becomes something the elves cannot ignore or push aside. It rises up like a fever, like a sickness that makes the whole world wrong. Some elves have described it as a tightening in the chest, as though they cannot quite draw a full breath. Others speak of a nausea, a dizziness, as though the ground beneath their feet has become unsteady. The elders tell stories of times when great swaths of forest were destroyed, and the elves for miles around could feel it. They would stop whatever they were doing, faces going pale, and turn toward the devastation. Some would fall to their knees. Others would weep without quite knowing why, tears streaming down their faces as they felt the forest's anguish as their own. And in the days that follow such destruction, the elves move through a world that feels diminished. The connection that usually brings them such peace now carries only grief. They feel the raw wounds in the earth, the panic of displaced creatures, the silence where there should be birdsong, the absence where great old trees once stood, their loss echoing through the forest like a chord that will never resolve. This is not an easy gift to carry. There are times when young elves, first becoming aware of this deep connection, wish they could close themselves off from it. Wish they could stop feeling every hurt, every harm that comes to the forest. It would be easier, they think, to be separate, to observe but not experience, to care but not to suffer. But the elders gently remind them that the connection cannot be divided. You cannot feel the forest's joy without also feeling its pain. You cannot sense the health of the woods without also sensing its wounds. To be truly part of something means to share in all of its seasons, all of its weathers, the light and the shadow both. And so the elves learn to carry this awareness with grace. They let themselves feel the forest's moods, its subtle shifts and changes. When a storm passes through and trees are struck by lightning, they feel the sharp crack of it, but also the forest's resilience, its ability to heal and adapt. When autumn comes and leaves fall, they feel the melancholy of it, yes, but also the rightness, the natural cycle, the preparation for winter's rest and spring's renewal. They learn to distinguish between the pain that is part of life's natural cycles and the pain that comes from careless destruction. A tree that falls from age and weather is sad but right. Its death feeds the forest, creates space for new growth, returns nutrients to the soil. The elves feel this passing, but they feel too the forest's acceptance of it, its ability to transform death into new life. But destruction that serves no purpose, that takes without giving back, that breaks the ancient rhythms of growth and decay. This kind of harm leaves a wound that does not easily heal. And the elves feel these wounds most keenly of all. Some say this sensitivity is why the elves rarely leave the forest. The world beyond the trees feels empty to them, silent in a way that is profoundly unsettling. They are so accustomed to the constant gentle presence of the forest in their awareness that to step beyond its boundaries is to feel suddenly, terribly alone. It is also why the elves are such devoted protectors of their woodland home. They do not guard the forest out of duty or obligation, but out of love and necessity both. To protect the forest is to protect themselves, to prevent the pain of its suffering from entering their own hearts. And yet, it is more than self-preservation. It is the natural response of any being who truly feels what another experiences. You cannot stand by and watch something you feel so deeply be harmed without acting to defend it. On quiet nights, when the forest is peaceful and whole, the elves rest easy. They fall asleep with the sense of the woods around them, holding them in its vast and ancient awareness. They feel the slow breathing of the earth beneath them, the patient growth of roots and fungi in the darkness below, the dreams of sleeping birds and drowsing deer. And in that communion, that deep and wordless sharing, there is a peace unlike any other. To be so intimately connected with something so much larger than yourself. To feel your small heartbeat echoing the vast heartbeat of an entire forest. To know that you are not alone, that you are held always in the living embrace of the woods you call home. This is what it means for the forest elves to feel the forest. Not to simply know it or observe it, but to experience it from within, to carry its moods in their own hearts, to share in its joy and its suffering both. It is a relationship deeper than friendship, more intimate than family. It is a bond that makes the elves and the forest not quite two separate things, but rather two expressions of the same living, breathing whole. And as the night deepens and the stars grow bright above the canopy, The elves settle into sleep still feeling that connection, that gentle presence, the forest dreaming around them and through them and with them, all together, all at peace. In the same way that a bird's hollow bones make flight possible, or a fish's sleek form lets it glide through water, the forest elves have been shaped by their home. Generations upon generations living among the branches, moving through dappled shadows, climbing and leaping and balancing on narrow limbs high above the forest floor. All of this has left its mark. The elves are built for the canopy, their very bodies a testament to lives lived in 3 dimensions, moving up and down and through the intricate architecture of the trees. If you were to see a forest elf standing beside a human, the differences would be immediately apparent. Where humans are solid and grounded, built for walking the earth, the elves are slender, almost impossibly so. Their frames are light, with long limbs that seem designed for reaching, for grasping branches, for extending toward the next handhold. There is an economy to their build, nothing wasted, nothing heavy or cumbersome. Every part of them speaks of efficiency, of grace, of a life spent moving through spaces where weight matters and balance is everything. Their slenderness is not frailty. It is adaptation. A heavier body would make the thin branches of the upper canopy treacherous, cause them to bend and crack under weight they were never meant to bear. But an elf can walk along branches that would barely support a large bird, placing their feet with such precision and lightness that the wood scarcely bends beneath them. Watch an elf move through the trees and you see something that is almost like watching water flow. There is no hesitation, no awkward shifting of weight. They simply move, one graceful motion flowing into the next. A step, a reach, a pull upward, a swing to the next branch, all of it as natural as breathing. Their bodies know the canopy the way your body knows how to walk across a flat floor. It is instinct. It is home. Their hands, too, are made for this life. Long fingers with a strength that belies their delicate appearance. They can grip bark for hours without tiring, can find purchase on surfaces that seem smooth and impossible. The pads of their fingers are sensitive, able to detect the subtle texture differences between living wood and dead, between a branch that will hold and one that might crack under pressure. And their feet, often bare even in cooler weather, are almost like hands themselves. The toes are longer than a human's, more flexible, able to curl around branches and grip with surprising strength. An elf can hang from a branch by their feet alone if needed, dangling upside down to reach something below, or simply to rest in a position that would seem impossibly uncomfortable to anyone else. But perhaps the most remarkable adaptation is in their eyes. Forest elves have developed vision suited for a world of shifting light and shadow, where survival might depend on spotting the subtle movement of a predator camouflaged among leaves, or noticing the slight discoloration that indicates a tree's sickness before it becomes obvious. Their eyes are large, catching as much light as possible in the dimness beneath the canopy. But it's not just size that makes them exceptional. An elf's peripheral vision is extraordinarily wide. They can see almost to the sides of their head without turning, aware of movement in a broad arc around them. This makes perfect sense for beings who move through 3-dimensional space, where danger or opportunity might come from any direction, above or below, left or right. More than that, their eyes perceive color with a subtlety that would astound most other creatures. They can detect the faintest shift in a leaf's green that might indicate disease or drought. They notice when bark changes hue by the smallest degree, warning of internal rot or insect damage. What looks to a human like a uniform canopy of green is, to an elf, a tapestry of 1,000 shades, each one telling a story about the health and age and species of every tree. In autumn, when leaves begin to change, an elf can predict exactly which day each tree will reach its peak color. They see the transformation beginning long before others would notice, watching the green slowly shift, the first hints of gold or crimson appearing in veins and edges. It's like watching a very slow sunset happening in each individual leaf. This sensitivity to color serves them well in other ways too. They can spot ripe berries against green foliage with ease. They notice the subtle coloration that indicates which mushrooms are safe to eat and which are deadly. They see the tiny shifts in an animal's coat that might reveal its mood or health. Their hearing, too, has adapted to forest life. They can distinguish between the sound of wind moving through oak leaves and wind moving through maple leaves. They hear the warning calls of birds and understand them, know which call means a hawk is circling and which means a fox is prowling the undergrowth. They can hear the creaking of a branch about to break, the subtle crack that warns them to shift their weight before disaster strikes. And they move quietly, so quietly that they can walk through a carpet of dry leaves and barely make a sound. This is partly skill, learned through years of practice, but it's also physical. Their light frames simply make less noise. Their feet, sensitive and precise, know exactly how to place themselves to minimize sound. They can control their breathing, slow it down until it's barely audible, can still their bodies into such perfect quietness that they seem to disappear into the forest itself. All of these adaptations work together to create a being perfectly suited for life in the canopy. An elf can be high in the branches before dawn, moving through the half-light with perfect confidence, their wide vision catching every detail, their light body making no sound, their strong hands and feet gripping bark and branch with easy certainty. They can leap from tree to tree, covering distances that would seem impossible, their light bodies arcing through the air, hands already reaching for the next branch, landing with a soft impact and continuing without pause. They can climb straight up a trunk, fingers and toes finding holds in the bark, moving upward as easily as walking upstairs. They can hang from branches to reach fruit or leaves growing on the outer edges of the canopy, their bodies swaying gently in the breeze, no fear of falling because their grip is sure and their balance is instinctive. They can weave through dense tangles of branches that would leave others scratched and caught, their slender frames slipping through gaps, their keen eyes seeing the path even in deep shadow. But these physical gifts serve a purpose beyond mere survival. They allow the elves to live fully in all levels of the forest, to be at home not just on the ground but in the middle canopy, the upper canopy, even the very crown of the tallest trees where the branches are thin and the wind is strong and the view stretches for miles. A young elf learns early to love the heights. They spend their childhood climbing, supervised at first by parents who know every safe path through the branches, and then gradually venturing higher and farther on their own. By the time they are grown, the canopy is as familiar as their own dwelling, and they move through it with the unconscious grace of long practice. There is a particular joy that elves take in the canopy at dawn. They climb before the sun rises, finding a comfortable branch in the highest reaches of a great tree, and wait there in the darkness. And when the sun finally breaks the horizon, they are above most of the forest, able to see the light touch the world for the first time. The sky turns from black to deep blue to purple to pink to gold, and all around them the forest canopy catches the light, leaves glowing amber and emerald. And they sit there, light as a bird, balanced on a branch that sways gently in the morning breeze, and watch the day begin. Their keen eyes notice every detail. The exact moment when the first ray of sunlight touches a particular tree. The way the light changes the color of the leaves. The birds that emerge from their night roosts and begin to sing. This is what it means to have a body made for the canopy. To be so perfectly adapted to a way of life that it feels effortless. To move through the branches with such natural grace that the distinction between earthbound and tree-dwelling disappears. To see and hear and sense the forest in ways that let you live not below the trees or beside them, but among them, part of them, at home in the swaying, breathing, green and living world of the forest crown. And as the day ends and darkness returns, the elves climb back down or settle into their high homes, their light bodies tired perhaps, but content. They rest among the branches they know so well, secure in their strength and balance, their keen eyes closing at last, their bodies relaxed in the gentle swaying motion that the wind brings to their arboreal beds. And they sleep, dream and rest, their slender forms perfectly at peace in a world that shaped them and that they, in turn, have learned to inhabit with such perfect grace. There is a particular kind of silence that follows the forest elves wherever they go. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of perfect harmony with the world around them. When an elf moves through the forest, they leave almost no trace of their passing. No broken branches. No trampled undergrowth. No clear footprints in the soft earth. They move like a whisper moves through the air, present but barely perceptible, there and then gone, leaving only the faintest memory of their presence. This is not magic, though it might seem so to those who don't understand. It is skill, refined over lifetimes, passed down from parent to child, from teacher to student, until it becomes as natural as breathing. It is the art of moving with the forest rather than through it, of becoming part of its natural rhythms rather than disturbing them. The canopy run is perhaps the most elegant expression of this art. While others must trudge along the forest floor, pushing through undergrowth, navigating around obstacles, the elves have another path entirely. They travel through the trees themselves, moving from branch to branch, sometimes 20 or 30 feet above the ground, covering distances without ever touching the earth below. Imagine watching an elf begin a canopy run. They approach a large tree, and without breaking stride, they simply flow upward. A hand catches a low branch, feet find purchase on the trunk, and in 3 fluid movements they are in the canopy. They pause for just a heartbeat, their keen eyes assessing the path ahead, and then they move. They step along a thick branch with the confidence of someone walking a wide road. As the branch narrows, they don't slow down. They continue, their arms extending slightly for balance, their light body keeping the branch from bending too much. At the end of the branch, where it thins to something that seems impossibly delicate, they don't hesitate. They leap. For a moment they are airborne, their slender form arcing through the dappled sunlight, arms extended, already reaching for the next branch. They land with barely a sound, hands grasping, feet finding the wood, body absorbing the impact with bent knees and perfect control. And then they're moving again, running along this new branch, already looking ahead to the next leap, the next handhold, the next step in their aerial journey. Sometimes the distance between trees is too great for a simple leap. Then the elves use the vines that drape between the branches, the thick woody creepers that have grown for decades, strong enough to support even their weight. They grab a vine and swing, their bodies describing an arc through the air, releasing at just the right moment to catch the next branch, continuing their momentum without pause. Or they might use a series of smaller branches, bouncing from one to another in rapid succession, each contact brief and light, like a stone skipping across water. Touch, push off, fly, land, push off again, the rhythm becoming almost musical, a dance performed high above the forest floor. To someone watching from below, if they could even spot the elf among the leaves and shadows, it would seem effortless. The elf flows through the canopy like water finding its path down a hillside, taking the route of least resistance, moving with gravity rather than against it, working with the natural structure of the forest rather than fighting it. But this skill takes years to develop. Young elves learn early, starting with the lowest branches, the safest jumps, always supervised until they develop the judgment to know which branches will hold and which won't, which leaps are possible and which are foolish. They learn to read the trees, to understand by looking at a branch how much weight it can bear, how much it will bend, whether the wood is strong or rotten inside. They learn the feel of different trees. Oak branches are strong and reliable but don't flex much. Willow branches are more forgiving, bending with your weight, but you must understand their limits. Pine branches can be treacherous, sometimes strong, sometimes brittle. Each species has its own personality, its own strengths and weaknesses, and the elves learn them all. They learn, too, about the vines. Which ones are alive and strong, anchored firmly at both ends? Which ones are old and dried, likely to snap under stress? How to test a vine with a quick tug before trusting it with your full weight? How to wrap the vine around your wrist for a more secure grip? How to swing without spinning? How to release without losing your orientation? And they learn about weather and seasons. The same branch that easily supports you in dry summer might be too slippery after a rain. In winter, ice can make even the surest handholds treacherous. In spring, new growth might look sturdy but still be too flexible and weak. The experienced elf knows all of this instinctively, adjusting their path without conscious thought. But the canopy run is only one form of the elves' silent movement. When they do travel on the ground, they are no less careful, no less skilled. They walk in a way that seems to leave no trace. Their light feet touch the earth gently, distributing weight carefully, avoiding the spots where their footprints would be most obvious. They step on stones where possible, on the thick roots that won't show impressions, on the patches of moss that will spring back up after they pass. When they must walk through leaves, they place their feet carefully, rolling from heel to toe in a way that minimizes the crackling sound. When they encounter muddy ground, they might instead find a fallen log and walk along its length, balanced perfectly, or they might step from root to root, stone to stone, crossing without ever touching the soft earth. They can pass through dense undergrowth that would snag and scratch and slow anyone else, but they seem to simply flow through it. They don't push branches aside forcefully. Instead, they move with them, turning sideways to slip through narrow gaps, ducking under low branches, stepping over tangled vines. They don't break through. They find the spaces that already exist, the natural pathways that others don't see. And they do all of this quietly, so quietly. Their breathing is controlled, slow and steady, never labored. Their clothing doesn't rustle because it's made from soft materials that move silently. They don't carry jangling equipment or items that might clatter together. Everything about them is designed for silence. This quietness serves many purposes. It allows them to move through the forest without disturbing the creatures who live there. A deer continues grazing, unaware that an elf passed within 10 feet. Birds remain on their nests, unconcerned. Even small, skittish creatures like squirrels and rabbits don't flee, because they don't perceive the elf as a threat or sometimes don't perceive them at all. It also provides safety. An enemy tracking elves through the forest would find it nearly impossible. The trail simply vanishes. There are no footprints to follow, no broken branches pointing the direction of travel, no disturbed undergrowth showing where someone pushed through. The elves pass like ghosts, leaving the forest exactly as they found it. But more than utility, this way of moving represents a philosophy. The elves believe that to move through the forest carelessly, leaving damage and disturbance in your wake, is disrespectful. The forest is their home, and you don't stomp through your home breaking things and making a mess. You move with care, with attention, with respect for everything around you. And so the children learn, from their very first steps, to walk softly, to be aware of where they place their feet, to notice what they're touching, what they're disturbing, to move through the world as if they are guests in a beautiful home, always mindful, always careful, always grateful for the privilege of being there. On a quiet evening, you might see a line of elves moving through the forest, traveling from one village to another. They flow through the canopy in single file, each one following the path the leader chooses, each one moving with that same fluid grace. From below, you might hear nothing more than a slight rustle of leaves, might see nothing more than brief shadows passing across the dappled light. And then they are gone. The forest settles back into its usual rhythms. The birds resume their songs. The small creatures go about their business. And if you went to look for signs that anyone had passed that way, you would find almost nothing. Perhaps a single leaf, displaced. Perhaps the faintest disturbance in the pattern of moss on a branch. But unless you knew exactly what to look for, you would never know that a dozen elves had just traveled through, moving like whispers, leaving silence in their wake. This is the art of elven movement. Not just a skill but a way of being in the world. To pass through the forest as the wind passes through it. Present but not intrusive, powerful but not destructive, leaving everything as it was, or perhaps even better, for having been there at all. And as night falls and the elves settle into their homes, they carry that same quietness with them. They move softly even in their own dwellings. They speak in gentle tones. They exist in harmony with the forest's own silence, the deep, peaceful quiet that descends when the day creatures sleep and the night creatures have not yet begun their stirring. And in that silence, in that perfect stillness, they rest. They close their eyes and let go of the day's movements, the careful steps, the precise leaps, the constant attention. They relax into sleep, their bodies at peace, their presence in the forest as soft and unobtrusive as ever, just another part of the endless gentle breathing of the woods at rest. In the deep forest, appearance is not about standing out but about blending in. The forest elves understand this in a way that goes beyond mere practicality. Their clothing is not just protection from the elements or decoration for the body. It is camouflage, yes, but more than that. It is another expression of their desire to be part of the forest rather than separate from it, to disappear into the green and brown world they call home, to become as invisible as mist among the trees. If you were to catch a glimpse of an elf in the forest and then blink, you might lose them entirely. One moment there is a figure standing among the trees, and the next there is only a play of light and shadow, leaves moving in the breeze, the dappled pattern of sunlight filtering through the canopy. The elf has not moved, but your eye can no longer distinguish them from their surroundings. They have vanished into the forest as completely as if they were never there at all. This disappearing act begins with color. The elves wear no bright reds or blues, no stark whites or deep blacks. Instead, their clothing embraces every shade that the forest offers. The green of new leaves in spring, the deeper green of summer foliage, the brown of bark and earth, the gray of stone and shadow, the gold and amber of autumn, even the pale gray-green of lichen on rocks, the russet of dead leaves, the soft beige of birch bark. But these are not uniform colors. A tunic might be predominantly green, but not a single, flat shade. Instead, it contains variations, subtle shifts from darker to lighter, from blue-green to yellow-green, from the bright green of sun-touched leaves to the deep green of shade. This mimics the natural variation in the forest itself, where no leaf is exactly the same color as its neighbor, where light and shadow create an endless shifting pattern. The fabrics themselves are often dyed using materials from the forest. Walnut hulls for browns, certain leaves for greens, bark and roots for various earth tones. The resulting colors are never harsh or artificial. They have the soft, muted quality of natural things, the same tones you see when you look at the forest itself. They seem to belong there, as much a part of the landscape as the trees and moss and stone. Some elves are particularly skilled at dyeing, and they create fabrics that seem to hold multiple colors at once, changing depending on the light and angle of view. A cloak might appear brown in shadow but show hints of green and gold when the sun touches it, perfectly matching the way light plays across the forest floor. A tunic might seem gray in the dim light under the canopy but take on warmer tones in the brighter spaces where sunlight breaks through. The patterns, too, are borrowed from nature. Some clothing is left plain, but often there are subtle designs worked into the fabric. Not geometric patterns or abstract designs, but organic shapes. The branching pattern of bare winter trees. The irregular splotches that look like lichen or moss. The dappled effect of sunlight through leaves. The vertical striations that echo bark texture. These patterns are never bold or obvious. They are suggestions, hints, subtle enough that they don't look like patterns at all from a distance, but close up they reveal the care and artistry that went into their creation. A cloak might have darker patches scattered across it that from 10 feet away simply look like natural variation in the fabric, but up close you can see that they're carefully placed to mimic the pattern of shadows in foliage. The cut and style of elven clothing also serves their need to blend in. The garments are close-fitting enough not to snag on branches but loose enough to move naturally, draping and flowing in ways that break up the outline of the body. Cloaks are especially useful for this, their irregular edges disrupting the humanoid silhouette, making the wearer look less like a person and more like just another shape in the forest. When an elf stands still wearing such a cloak, they can be nearly impossible to spot. The cloak falls around them in natural folds that mimic the hanging of vines or the drape of moss. Its mottled colors blend with the background. Its irregular hem doesn't create a straight line that the eye might catch. The elf simply disappears, becoming part of the forest's texture. The elves also understand the importance of texture in camouflage. Smooth, shiny fabrics would catch the light in ways that nothing natural does, instantly drawing the eye. So their clothing is made from materials with a matte finish, fabrics that absorb light rather than reflecting it. Some garments even incorporate actual forest materials, with leaves or small twigs attached, with strips of bark woven in, with moss or lichen growing on them like it would on a tree. These living embellishments are treated carefully, kept healthy and growing, becoming genuinely part of the garment. A cloak might host a small garden of moss across its shoulders, the green growth thriving in the damp forest air. A tunic might have tiny ferns attached to it, their roots kept moist by the fabric. These living decorations make the camouflage even more perfect, adding actual forest life to the disguise. The elves' attention to blending in extends even to the smallest details. They avoid shiny buttons or bright buckles that might catch the light and give them away. Instead, they use wooden toggles, leather ties, bone clasps, all materials that match the forest's palette. Even their belts and pouches are made from materials in forest colors, their gear designed to disappear as much as their clothing does. Footwear, when they wear it, is similarly subtle. Soft leather in shades of brown or gray, sometimes wrapped with strips of fabric to break up the outline. The soles are flexible and quiet, leaving minimal prints, and the overall design is such that even a boot print might be mistaken for the impression of an animal's paw or simply an irregularity in the earth. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about elven camouflage is that it's not static. The elves understand that the forest changes with the seasons, and their clothing changes with it. The colors that make you invisible in summer's green abundance would make you stand out in autumn's gold and brown. The patterns that work in spring's fresh growth would fail in winter's bare branches. And so the elves maintain wardrobes that shift with the turning year. In spring, they wear the bright greens and fresh browns of new growth. In summer, deeper greens and the dark browns of rich earth. In autumn, they bring out clothing in gold, orange, russet, and deep brown, matching the changing leaves. In winter, they wear grays and pale browns, the colors of bare bark and frozen earth, sometimes even incorporating white or pale gray to blend with snow. Some elves are particularly skilled at this seasonal adaptation, having different cloaks or outer layers that they change throughout the year, even throughout the day as light conditions shift. They might wear a greener cloak in the morning when dew makes everything look fresh and vibrant, then switch to something browner in the afternoon when the light is warmer and golden. This attention to camouflage is taught to elven children from an early age. They learn to look at the forest around them and understand what colors and patterns would let them blend in. They practice standing still in their camouflaged clothing, learning to control their breathing, to not move even when insects land on them, to become as motionless and natural as a tree trunk or a boulder. And they learn that camouflage is not just about clothing but about behavior. You can wear perfect camouflage, but if you move suddenly or make noise, you'll be spotted instantly. True invisibility comes from combining the right appearance with the right actions, moving slowly when you must move, freezing completely when you sense attention nearby, understanding that the eye is drawn to movement above all else. There are stories of elves standing mere feet from travelers passing through the forest, completely unseen. The traveler looks right at the elf but sees only trees and shadows, their brain unable to pick out the camouflaged figure from the background. The elf remains still, barely breathing, their mottled green and brown clothing breaking up their outlines so perfectly that they are invisible in plain sight. And then the traveler passes, and the elf relaxes, perhaps allows themselves a small smile at the effectiveness of their disguise. They wait a few moments more to be sure, then continue on their way, still moving carefully, still part of the forest's quiet mystery. On misty mornings, when fog drifts between the trees and visibility is already reduced, the elves become even more ghost-like. Their camouflaged forms in the gray-white mist are nearly impossible to detect. They move through the fog like spirits, like the forest itself given momentary form, there and then not there, as ephemeral as the mist that surrounds them. This is what the elves have achieved with their clothing. Not fashion in the way others might understand it, but a kind of artistry that serves a deeper purpose. Every garment is a statement of belonging, of harmony with the forest. Every color choice, every pattern, every texture is chosen to help them disappear, to let them move through their woodland home as invisibly as the wind, as quietly as growing moss, as naturally as the light and shadow that play endlessly among the leaves. And when the day ends and the elves return to their homes, they might remove their outer layers, might shed the cloaks and tunics that make them vanish into the forest. But even their more casual clothing, the garments they wear at home, maintains those same forest colors, those same natural tones. Because for the elves, being part of the forest is not something they do only when they venture out. It is who they are, always, in every moment. And as they settle in for the night, their clothing hanging nearby in shades of green and brown, they close their eyes in peace, knowing that tomorrow they will dress once more in the colors of the forest, will step out into the green world and vanish into it as easily as breathing, as naturally as leaves turning toward sunlight, as completely as mist dissolving into morning air. For the forest elves, there is no distinction between living and caretaking. Every action they take, from the moment they wake to the moment they sleep, is infused with an awareness of their role as guardians and stewards. Their daily life is not separate from the forest's well-being but intimately woven into it. They do not simply live off the land. They live with it, in relationship with it, always aware that they are both taking from the forest and giving back to it in an endless cycle of reciprocity. The knowledge of plants is perhaps the deepest and most essential skill an elf can possess. From childhood, they learn to recognize every herb, every flower, every mushroom, every leaf in their territory. They learn not just names but properties, not just appearances but purposes. This plant soothes fevers. That one stops bleeding. This mushroom can ease pain but in the wrong dose will stop your heart. That flower, dried and prepared correctly, can open the mind to visions, but handled carelessly can bring madness. Walk through the forest with an elven herbalist and you are walking through a vast, living pharmacy. What looks to untrained eyes like random undergrowth is to them a carefully organized collection of medicines and tools. They know where each plant grows, which clearings host which herbs, which trees shelter which mushrooms. They know the seasons too, when each plant is most potent, when bark should be harvested, when roots should be dug, when leaves should be picked. There is a particular reverence in the way elves harvest plants. They never take without asking first. This might seem like superstition to outsiders, but for the elves it is simple courtesy. Before they cut a plant or dig a root, they pause. They place a hand on the earth or on the plant itself. They speak, sometimes aloud, sometimes only in their minds, explaining what they need and why. Thanking the plant for its gift. Promising that it will be used well, used respectfully, used to help. And they never take everything. If they find a patch of medicinal herbs, they harvest perhaps one plant in 5, leaving the rest to continue growing, to spread seeds, to maintain the population. If they need bark from a tree, they take only a small strip, never girdling the trunk, never taking so much that the tree cannot heal. If they gather mushrooms, they leave some to release their spores, ensuring the next generation. This restraint is not sacrifice. It is wisdom. The elves understand that the forest's bounty is generous but not infinite. Take too much and there will be nothing left for next year, for next season, for the next person who needs it. But take carefully, gratefully, and the forest will continue to provide, year after year, generation after generation. The knowledge of plants is passed down with great care. Elder herbalists teach the young ones not just through words but through experience. They walk together through the forest, the elder pointing out plants, explaining their uses, telling stories of times when this herb saved a life or that root eased suffering. The young ones learn to identify plants by sight, by smell, by touch, by the places they grow and the companions they keep. They learn which plants are friends, often found growing together, each benefiting the other. They learn which plants are warnings, their presence indicating that more dangerous species might be nearby. They learn the relationship between soil and plant, between light and growth, between season and potency. And they learn preparation. Some plants must be used fresh. Others are more powerful when dried. Some need to be boiled, others steeped in cool water, others ground to powder or pressed for their oils. The timing matters, the temperature matters, the proportions matter. A healing dose and a poisonous dose might differ by only a few drops or a pinch of powder. The elves treat this knowledge with appropriate respect. The same plant that heals can harm if used wrongly. And there are plants in the forest that should rarely or never be used at all, plants whose power is too dangerous, too unpredictable. The elves know these too, know them by sight and by the warning signs that surround them, and they teach their children to recognize and avoid them. But knowledge of plants is only one part of the elves' careful relationship with the forest. They are also hunters, though they hunt very differently than many others might. For the elves, hunting is not sport. It is not about trophies or glory. It is about sustenance, pure and simple, and it is governed by rules as strict and sacred as any ritual. The first rule is necessity. Elves hunt only when they need to, when other food sources are not sufficient, when meat is required for health or for a specific purpose. They do not kill for pleasure or practice. Every death is weighed carefully, considered deeply, and entered into only when truly needed. The second rule is sustainability. The elves watch the animal populations carefully, noting their numbers, their health, their breeding patterns. They know which species are abundant and which are struggling. They know when a hard winter has reduced deer populations and when a mild season has allowed rabbits to multiply. And they adjust their hunting accordingly, taking only from populations that can sustain the loss. They target the sick and the old more often than the young and healthy. This might seem counterintuitive, but it serves the forest. An old deer, past its breeding years, will provide meat for the elves while also removing a mouth that competes for food with younger, more vital animals. A sick rabbit, likely to die soon anyway, becomes sustenance while preventing its illness from spreading to others. The third rule is respect. When an elf hunts, they do so with gratitude and reverence. They track their prey carefully, waiting for the right moment, ensuring a clean, quick kill that causes minimal suffering. When the animal falls, the elf approaches with ceremony. They thank the creature for its sacrifice. They honor its spirit. They promise that its death will have meaning, that nothing will be wasted. And indeed, nothing is wasted. The meat feeds the community. The hide becomes clothing, bags, bindings. The bones become tools, needles, knife handles, components for other implements. The sinews become cord and thread. Even the organs are used, some for food, some for other purposes. The blood returns to the earth. The unusable parts are left in the forest to feed scavengers and decomposers, returning nutrients to the soil. An elf might spend weeks or even months using every part of a single deer. They tan the hide with careful attention, producing leather that is soft and durable. They clean and dry the sinews, separating them into threads. They carve the bones into useful shapes, polishing them smooth. They preserve the meat through smoking or drying, ensuring it will last. And through all of this work, they maintain their gratitude. They remember the animal that gave its life. Some elves keep a small token from each animal they kill, a reminder, a memorial. A tooth, perhaps, or a small bone, kept not as a trophy but as a remembrance of a life taken and the responsibility that comes with it. The elves also hunt with awareness of balance. They know that if they take too many predators, prey populations will explode and then crash from starvation. They know that if they take too much prey, predators will go hungry and their numbers will decline. They are part of a complex web, and every thread they pull affects others. So they hunt with thought for the whole system, not just their own needs. There are seasons when they do not hunt at all. Breeding seasons are sacred, times when animals are left completely undisturbed to raise their young. The elves might go hungry rather than interfere with this crucial time. They know that patience now means abundance later, that protecting breeding populations ensures there will be animals to hunt in future years. And there are individual animals that the elves will not hunt, animals that have become known to them, that they have watched and appreciated. An old stag that has sired many offspring, now in his final years, might be left in peace to live out his days naturally. A doe who consistently produces strong, healthy fawns might be given protection, her genetics too valuable to the herd to interrupt. This careful, respectful approach to hunting creates a relationship between the elves and the forest animals that goes beyond simple predator and prey. The animals seem to sense that the elves are different from other hunters. Deer do not flee in panic at the sight of an elf, though they remain appropriately cautious. Birds do not raise alarms when elves pass through their territories. There is an understanding, not quite trust but something close to it, a recognition that the elves belong in the forest just as the animals do. The same principles that guide hunting guide all of the elves' interactions with the forest. When they gather firewood, they take only dead wood, never cutting living trees for fuel. When they need timber for building, they select carefully, taking trees that are suppressing others or growing in places where thinning would benefit the overall forest health. They repair damage when they find it. A tree wounded by storm might be treated with preparations that prevent infection. An eroded streambank might be reinforced with carefully placed stones and plantings. An area damaged by fire might be tended, with the elves planting seeds and protecting young growth until the forest can recover on its own. This is how the elves live. Not taking without thought. Not consuming without awareness. But always in relationship, always in balance, always understanding that they are part of the forest and the forest is part of them. Their daily life is their caretaking. Their survival is tied to the forest's thriving. and they would have it no other way. As evening comes and the day's work is done, an elf might sit by their small fire, preparing a meal from the forest's gifts. Mushrooms gathered that morning. Greens picked from a patch they have tended for years. Perhaps meat from a recent hunt, cooked slowly, eaten gratefully. And as they eat, they are aware of the circle, the endless flow of energy from soil to plant to animal to elf and back to soil again. They sleep with the satisfaction of having lived this day well, of having taken what they needed and given what they could, of having honored their relationship with the forest that is their home, their provider, their sacred trust. And in their dreams, perhaps, they walk through green growing places, tending and harvesting, hunting and honoring, living the life of caretaking that is the truest expression of who they are. In the deep forest, there are no grand cities rising above the trees. No palaces of stone. No crowded streets or towering monuments to power. The forest elves have built their society on a different foundation entirely, one that values intimacy over scale, wisdom over authority, and the bonds between individuals over the structures of governance. They live in small circles, in clans and family groups, where everyone knows everyone, where decisions are made together, and where the needs of the community are understood not through laws and policies but through the simple, profound knowledge of caring for people you have known all your life. A typical elven clan might number anywhere from 20 to 50 individuals. Large enough to provide support and diversity, small enough that genuine relationships can exist between all members. These are not strangers living side by side but families, in the deepest sense of that word. They have watched each other grow. They know each other's strengths and struggles. They share memories that stretch back generations, stories that bind them together more securely than any written law. The clan often centers around an extended family, but it is not limited to blood relations. Adoption is common and carries no stigma. An orphan child might be welcomed into a clan with the same love and acceptance as one born to it. An outsider who proves themselves trustworthy and compatible might be invited to join, becoming as much a part of the clan as anyone born into it. What matters is not ancestry but relationship, not bloodline but belonging. These clans do not have rulers in the way other societies might understand the concept. There is no king or chief who holds power over others, who makes decisions that all must follow. Instead, the elves recognize a different kind of authority, one that comes not from position but from wisdom, not from power but from respect earned over a lifetime. The elders hold this kind of authority. These are the oldest members of the clan, those who have lived long enough to see patterns repeat, to understand the consequences of choices, to have accumulated not just years but genuine wisdom. When difficult decisions must be made, when conflicts arise, when the clan faces uncertainty, it is to the elders that others turn for guidance. But even the elders do not command. They advise. They share their perspective. They offer the benefit of their experience. The final decision, particularly in matters that affect the whole clan, is made collectively, with everyone's voice heard and considered. A young elf's opinion carries weight alongside an elder's wisdom. A child's observation might illuminate an issue that adults have overlooked. This way of making decisions is slower than rule by decree. It requires patience, discussion, sometimes lengthy deliberation. But it also ensures that decisions, once made, are supported by the entire community. There is no resentful faction forced to comply with a leader's will, because there is no leader imposing their will. There is only the clan, working together to find the path that serves them all. Conflicts do arise, of course. Even in a small, close-knit group, disagreements are inevitable. Two elves might clash over how to handle a particular situation. Someone might feel they have been treated unfairly. Tensions might develop over limited resources or personal matters. But the elves have developed ways of addressing conflict that prioritize healing over punishment, understanding over judgment. When a dispute occurs, the parties are encouraged to speak with each other first, to try to understand the other's perspective and find resolution between themselves. If this fails, they might invite a respected elder to mediate, not to judge but to help them hear each other, to find common ground. The focus is always on restoring harmony, on repairing the relationship, on helping both parties move forward together. Serious transgressions, acts that harm the clan or violate sacred values, are handled by the community as a whole. The transgressor is not punished in secret or by decree but faces the entire clan. They must answer for their actions, must confront the consequences of what they have done. This is often far more powerful than any external punishment could be. To see the disappointment or hurt in the eyes of people you love, to understand how your actions have affected those who matter most to you. In cases where someone has caused genuine harm and shows no remorse, where they cannot or will not change their behavior, the ultimate consequence is exile. To be sent away from the clan, to lose the bonds and belonging that make life meaningful, this is the gravest punishment the elves can imagine. It is used rarely, only when all other attempts at reconciliation have failed. But most conflicts never reach such extremes. Most are resolved through conversation, through mediation, through the simple fact that everyone involved must continue living together and therefore has a strong incentive to find peace. The small size of the clan makes it impossible to simply avoid someone you have quarreled with. You will see them every day. You will work beside them, eat with them, share the forest with them. And so you learn to work through differences, to forgive, to find ways to coexist even when you do not entirely agree. The physical arrangement of elven settlements reflects this social structure. There is no central building that dominates the others, no palace or town hall. Instead, dwellings are scattered through the forest, each one distinct, each one suited to the preferences of those who live there. They might be clustered in a general area, close enough for easy interaction but far enough apart for privacy. At the heart of the settlement, there is usually a gathering place. Not a building but an open space, perhaps a clearing beneath an especially magnificent tree, perhaps a grove where several ancient trees create a natural cathedral of branches overhead. This is where the clan comes together for meetings, for celebrations, for ceremonies, for the simple pleasure of being together. Here, on warm evenings, the clan might gather after the day's work is done. They sit in a circle, as equals, as family. They share food, passing baskets of gathered berries, offering pieces of bread made from acorn flour, distributing portions of meat from a recent hunt. Everyone receives a share. No one goes without while others have plenty. And they talk. They share stories of their day, the small observations and experiences that make up a life. Someone describes a rare bird they spotted. Another tells of finding a new patch of medicinal herbs. A child excitedly relates an adventure in the canopy. An elder shares a memory from decades past, a story that holds a lesson or simply brings laughter. These gatherings serve many purposes. They keep everyone informed about what is happening in the forest around them. They allow the sharing of knowledge and skills. They strengthen bonds through shared laughter and shared listening. They remind everyone that they are part of something larger than themselves, part of a community that cares for them and that they, in turn, care for. The elves also gather for more formal purposes. When decisions must be made that affect the entire clan, everyone assembles. The matter is presented, discussed from all angles. Those with relevant knowledge or experience speak. Others listen, ask questions, offer their thoughts. The conversation might last hours, might even continue over several days if the issue is complex or contentious. Eventually, a consensus emerges. Not everyone might agree completely, but a sense develops of what the clan as a whole can support, what feels right to the majority while remaining acceptable to the minority. This is the decision that moves forward, not imposed from above but grown from within the community. Celebrations, too, bring the clan together. The changing seasons are marked with ceremony. The first day of spring, when life returns to the forest. The longest day of summer, when light triumphs. The harvest time of autumn, when gratitude is expressed. The deep quiet of winter solstice, when the clan gathers close and waits for light's return. There are personal celebrations as well. A child's naming ceremony, when they are formally welcomed into the clan. A coming-of-age ritual, when a young elf is recognized as an adult. A joining ceremony, when two elves pledge to share their lives together. And the death vigils, when the clan gathers to honor one who has passed, to share memories, to grieve together, to ensure that the departed is remembered and celebrated. In these moments, the strength of the small circle becomes most apparent. Everyone present knows the person being honored. They have stories to share, memories to contribute. The ceremony is not generic but deeply personal, woven from the actual relationships and experiences that made up a life. This intimacy extends to all aspects of Elven society. There are no strangers within the clan. When someone falls ill, the entire community is aware and concerned. When someone struggles, others step in to help without being asked. When someone achieves something remarkable, the whole clan celebrates. Your joys are shared. Your sorrows are shouldered together. You are never alone in your triumphs or your trials. The wisdom of the elders is sought not just for major decisions but for everyday guidance. A young elf learning to tan leather might sit with an elder who has perfected the craft over centuries, learning not just technique but patience, not just skill but wisdom. A new parent might turn to an elder for advice on raising children, on balancing guidance with freedom, on passing on traditions while allowing for growth and change. And the elders, in turn, find purpose in this role. They are not set aside or diminished by age but increasingly valued, their accumulated wisdom recognized as the treasure it is. They teach, they guide, they remember, they help the clan navigate challenges by sharing what they learned from similar situations decades or centuries before. This is the society of the Forest Elves. Not vast and complex but small and intimate. Not governed by distant rulers but guided by shared wisdom. Not held together by laws and enforcement but by bonds of genuine relationship, by the knowledge that you belong to these people and they belong to you, by the simple, profound truth that you are part of a circle that will hold you, support you, challenge you, and love you from your first breath to your last. And as night deepens and the gathering disperses, each elf returning to their own dwelling, they carry with them the warmth of that connection. They sleep knowing they are part of something larger than themselves, something built not on hierarchy or power but on the oldest and strongest foundation of all, the bonds between hearts that have chosen to walk through life together, in the small, sacred circles that are the truest form of home. There is a particular kind of patience required to create art that grows. Not the patience of hours or days, but the patience of years, of decades, sometimes of centuries. The Forest Elves possess this patience in abundance, and it shapes every aspect of how they create. They do not force nature to their will. They do not cut and carve and construct from dead materials. Instead, they work with living things, guiding growth rather than imposing form, collaborating with the forest in acts of creation that blur the line between art and nature until the distinction disappears entirely. Imagine a bridge spanning a stream deep in the forest. But this is no bridge of cut timbers and iron nails. This bridge is alive. Two trees grow on opposite banks, and their branches have been guided over decades to reach toward each other, to intertwine and strengthen, until they form a natural arch over the water. Smaller branches fill the gaps, woven together while still growing, creating a surface sturdy enough to walk across. Vines have been encouraged to wrap around the structure, adding strength and stability. Moss grows naturally on the wood, providing cushioning and traction. This bridge was not built in a season. It was grown over perhaps 30 years, perhaps 50. An elf elder might have begun the process when they were young, whispering to saplings, gently bending their early growth toward each other. They returned week after week, year after year, adjusting the direction of branches, pruning away growth that went astray, encouraging the patterns that would eventually form the bridge. And now, decades later, the bridge stands complete. Or perhaps not complete, for it continues to grow, continues to strengthen, continues to change with each passing season. In spring, it might bloom with flowers. In summer, it is thick with green leaves. In autumn, it glows with color. In winter, its bare branches reveal the elegant structure beneath. The bridge is never the same twice, always alive, always part of the forest's ongoing transformation. This is how the Forest Elves create. Not through domination but through dialogue. Not by bending nature to their will but by understanding nature's will and working with it, finding the places where their desires and the forest's natural tendencies align. When an elf wants to create a new dwelling, they do not cut down trees to make lumber. Instead, they find young trees growing in a suitable location and begin a conversation that will last decades. They might select 3 or 4 saplings growing in a rough circle. As these trees grow, the elf visits regularly, gently guiding their trunks to lean slightly inward, encouraging them to grow toward each other rather than straight up. Year by year, the trees respond. Their trunks curve as directed, reaching toward the center of the circle. The elf prunes away branches on the inside, leaving the outer branches to grow naturally, creating walls of living foliage. As the trees mature and their trunks near each other at the top, the elf might graft them together, binding the living wood until it fuses, creating a dome of living trees with a hollow space inside. This process cannot be rushed. The trees grow at their own pace, following their own internal rhythms. The elf can guide but not force, can encourage but not demand. They must work within the tree's natural capacity, understanding what is possible and what would damage or kill the tree. They must read the tree's responses, noticing when guidance is being accepted and when it is being resisted, adjusting their approach accordingly. But the result, when it finally comes, is something no conventional construction could match. A home that breathes, that lives, that changes with the seasons. A dwelling that is not separate from the forest but utterly integrated with it, as much a natural feature as any tree that was never touched by elven hands. The same principles apply to smaller creations. An elf might want a staff, a walking stick for support on long journeys. Rather than cutting a straight branch and shaping it, they might find a young sapling with promise and begin guiding its growth. They bend it slightly, encouraging it to grow at an angle. They might wrap the growing wood at intervals, creating natural grips where the wood thickens slightly. They prune away side branches, focusing the tree's energy into a single, strong stem. Years later, when the staff has reached the desired height and thickness, the elf cuts it free from its roots. Even this cutting is done with ceremony, with gratitude, with the understanding that they are taking a life, however small. And the staff they receive is perfectly suited to their height, their grip, their needs, shaped through years of patient guidance rather than hours of carving. Some elves become true masters of this living art, creating works of such beauty and complexity that they seem to transcend the boundary between nature and craft. There are stories of entire halls grown from a circle of ancient oaks, their branches trained over centuries to form vaulted ceilings of impossible grace. Of staircases that spiral up the trunk of a great tree, each step a carefully shaped branch, living and strong. Of furniture grown rather than built, chairs and tables that are still rooted, still alive, they would responding to touch with the warmth of living things. These master crafters understand growth patterns with an intimacy that borders on the mystical. They know which trees are most flexible, which most stubborn. They know how to use the tree's natural responses to encourage desired shapes. When a tree is wounded, it often grows extra wood around the injury. A skilled crafter can use this, carefully wounding in strategic places to create thickening where strength is needed. They understand that trees respond to light, always growing toward the sun. By controlling what light reaches which branches, through careful pruning or the placement of reflective surfaces, they can guide growth in specific directions. They know that trees communicate through their roots, sharing resources and information, and that this underground network can be influenced to affect growth patterns above ground. They work with the tree's natural tendencies toward symmetry or asymmetry, toward straight growth or curved, toward dense wood or lighter growth. Every species has its own personality, its own preferences and resistances. Oak is strong and enduring but less flexible. Willow bends easily but might not hold the most complex shapes. Ash is resilient and responsive. Pine grows quickly but requires different techniques than hardwoods. And beyond individual trees, these master crafters understand how to work with groups of plants, creating living sculptures that involve multiple species in complex relationships. They might guide a tree's growth while also cultivating vines that will strengthen the structure, encouraging moss that will insulate, planting flowers that will beautify. The result is not just a tree shaped for purpose but an entire living ecosystem, deliberately cultivated to serve both aesthetic and practical functions. This kind of creation requires a shift in thinking about art and making. In most cultures, art is about imposing your vision on materials. You have an idea and you force wood or stone or metal to match it. But the forest elves approach creation differently. They begin with observation, watching the forest, understanding what is already happening, what wants to grow, what natural patterns and tendencies exist. then they have their own vision, their own desire. And the art is in finding where these two things can meet, where the forest's natural growth and the elf's desired outcome can align. The final creation is not purely the elf's vision nor purely the forest's natural growth, but something that emerges from the collaboration, often surprising both parties, often more beautiful than either could have achieved alone. This approach teaches humility. The forest is not clay to be molded or marble to be carved. It is a partner, with its own will, its own needs, its own timeline. An elf might have a vision for a creation, but if the forest resists, if the trees do not respond to guidance, the elf must adapt. They must find a new vision, one that works with what the forest is willing to offer. Sometimes this means abandoning a project entirely. The trees chosen for a dwelling might not grow as hoped. Disease might strike. A storm might damage carefully guided branches. The elf must accept these setbacks with grace, understanding that they are working with living things that have their own vulnerabilities, their own limitations. But more often, the resistance or difficulty leads to something unexpected and wonderful. The tree that won't bend as planned might develop a different shape that is even more beautiful. The branch that grows in an unintended direction might create an opportunity for a feature the elf never imagined. Collaboration means being open to surprise, to outcomes that emerge from the interaction rather than existing fully formed in anyone's mind at the start. Young elves learning this art often struggle with the patience it requires. They want results now, want to see their vision realized quickly. But the elders teach them to slow down, to observe, to wait. They learn that there is deep satisfaction in the process itself, in the regular visits to check on growing projects, in the small adjustments and gentle encouragements, in watching something slowly take shape over months and years. They learn that some of the greatest works will not be completed in their lifetime. An elder might begin a project knowing they will not live to see it finished. But they begin it anyway, trusting that others will continue the work, that the vision will be carried forward even after they are gone. And this connects them to past and future both, to the elves who began projects that they now tend, and to the elves yet unborn who will one day tend the projects they have begun. On quiet afternoons, you might see an elf visiting their growing projects scattered through the forest. They walk from one to another, spending a few moments with each. A touch here, encouraging a branch. A whisper there, offering gratitude. A careful pruning of unwanted growth. An addition of mulch or water if needed. These visits are not work in the laborious sense but meditation, connection, ongoing conversation with living things that are slowly becoming art. And in the evening, as the light fades and the elf returns home, they carry with them a particular kind of satisfaction. They have not forced anything today. They have not dominated or controlled. They have simply continued the ancient practice of collaboration, of working with the forest to create beauty that lives and grows, art that breathes, creations that are never finished but always becoming, always changing, always alive. And as they settle into sleep in their own living home, surrounded by walls that grow and branches that shelter, they rest in the knowledge that they are part of something larger, something slower, something that connects past and future in the patient, endless dance of growth. And they dream, perhaps, of forests yet to come, of projects just beginning, of art that will outlive them and continue growing long after they have returned to the earth, their own small contribution to the forest's endless, beautiful unfolding. There are places in the forest where the elves walk more carefully than usual. Places where their voices drop to whispers. Places where certain materials are never brought, where certain activities are never performed. These are the sacred groves, the holy places, and they are governed by rules that go deeper than mere custom. These are limits that touch on something fundamental about how the elves understand their relationship with the earth, with the forest, with the sacred mystery that pulses through all living things. In these places, metal is unwelcome. Not all metal, perhaps, and not under all circumstances, but heavy metalworking, the forging and smelting and shaping that requires fire and force, this is forbidden. The elves believe that such work wounds the earth, that it takes something precious from the ground and transforms it through violence and heat into something that, however useful, carries the memory of that violation. This is not a belief that metal itself is evil or wrong. The elves understand that metal has its uses. They might accept metal tools gifted from outside, might use iron for certain necessary tasks. But they do not mine the earth in their sacred territories. They do not build forges in their holy groves. They do not fill these reverent spaces with the clang of hammer on anvil or the roar of forge fires. The reasoning is ancient and profound. The earth, the elves believe, is a living body. To dig deep into it, to extract its metals, is like cutting into flesh. The scarring that mining leaves, the open wounds in hillsides, the stripped earth, the poisoned streams, these are injuries that the land suffers. And while such injuries might sometimes be necessary in the wider world, in the places that the elves hold most sacred, they are unthinkable. Imagine standing in a sacred grove. The trees here are ancient beyond measure, their trunks so wide that 3 elves linking hands could not encircle them. Their roots go deep, deep into the earth, connecting with stone and soil and the slow dreaming consciousness that dwells in the bones of the world. The air feels different here. Thicker somehow. More alive. Every breath you take seems to carry meaning, seems to connect you to something vast and old. In such a place, the thought of driving metal tools into the ground, of building fires hot enough to melt, or of filling the air with smoke and the sound of hammering, it feels wrong. Not wrong in the sense of breaking a rule, but wrong in the deeper sense of violating something sacred, of bringing disharmony into a place that exists as a perfect expression of balance and peace. And so in the sacred groves, the elves use other materials. Wood, shaped with patience and care. Bone, cleaned and carved from animals that died naturally or were taken with gratitude. Stone, selected from stream beds or cliff faces where it has already broken free from the earth, never quarried from living rock in sacred ground. These materials feel appropriate in ways that metal does not. Wood comes from trees, living things that grow and die in their natural cycles. To use wood is to participate in those cycles, to give purpose to what the tree has freely offered. Bone too is part of the natural cycle of life and death, returned to use rather than left to waste. And stone, ancient and patient, is already separate from the earth, already available, requiring no wounding of the land to obtain. The tools and objects created from these materials in the sacred groves are often extraordinarily beautiful. Without metal, the elves cannot rely on sharp edges or strong fastenings that come easily to metalworking. Instead, they must use ingenuity, must understand the materials more deeply, must work with rather than against their natural properties. A knife in the sacred grove might be made from carefully knapped flint, its edge achieved through patience and skill rather than grinding and honing. The handle might be carved from bone or antler, fitted perfectly to the stone blade, bound with sinew that shrinks as it dries, creating a grip stronger than any metal fastening. The result is a tool that is beautiful in its simplicity, that carries no trace of violence in its making, that feels right in the hand and right in the sacred space. Structures in the holy places are built entirely from materials the forest offers freely. Fallen branches woven together. Living trees shaped over decades to form shelters or meeting places. Stone placed upon stone without mortar, fitted so perfectly that no binding is needed. These buildings feel like part of the landscape, growing from it naturally rather than imposed upon it. The elves extend these limits to their personal belongings when they enter sacred spaces. They might remove metal jewelry or tools before stepping into a holy grove, leaving them at the boundary, a sign of respect. They understand that the sacred places require a different way of being, a different relationship with the material world, and they willingly embrace those limitations. This creates an interesting discipline. In the wider forest, the elves might use some metal tools, might accept the practical advantages they offer. But knowing that there are places where such tools cannot be used keeps them from becoming dependent on metal, from losing the skills and knowledge needed to work with traditional materials. An elf who can carve only with metal tools would be helpless in the sacred groves. But an elf who has maintained the ancient skills, who can knap stone and carve with bone tools and shape wood with wooden implements, this elf can move freely through all parts of their world, can function fully even in the places where metal is forbidden. There is also a spiritual dimension to this practice. Working without metal, using only materials that require patience and understanding rather than force, is seen as a form of meditation, a practice that aligns the maker with the sacred. The slow, careful work of knapping a stone blade becomes a prayer. The patient carving of bone becomes communion with the sacred mystery. And the objects created through such work carry a different quality than those made with metal tools. They seem to vibrate at a different frequency, seem to harmonize with the sacred groves in ways that metal objects do not. An elf holding a flint blade in a holy place feels the rightness of it, the way it belongs there, the way it enhances rather than diminishes the sacred atmosphere. The prohibitions extend beyond materials to processes. The fires used in sacred groves are small and carefully tended, never the roaring blazes needed for metalwork. The sounds are kept soft and natural, never the harsh clanging of forge work. Even the activities performed are chosen carefully, prioritizing those that align with the sacred nature of the place. Ceremonies in the holy groves use only natural materials. Offerings might include flowers, seeds, water, perhaps food made from the forest's bounty. Never coins or metal ornaments. Never anything that required wounding the earth to obtain. The ceremonies themselves are quiet, contemplative, focused on connection rather than spectacle. Some groves are so sacred that even the restrictions on metal are not enough. In the most holy places, the elves limit their presence entirely. They visit rarely, tread lightly, take nothing, leave nothing but the faintest footprints that the forest quickly erases. These places are for the land itself, for the spirits that dwell there, for the sacred consciousness that needs space away from even the gentlest interference. The elves teach their children about these limits from an early age. They take them to the sacred groves and explain why certain things are not done there. They teach them to recognize the feeling of sacred space, the subtle shift in atmosphere that marks a place as holy. They instill a respect for these limits that goes beyond obedience to become internalized understanding. And the children grow up knowing that the world has boundaries that should not be crossed, that there are places and ways of being that must be protected, that unlimited access and unlimited use is not their right. They learn that some of the most precious things are preserved precisely through restraint, through choosing not to do things they have the power to do. This philosophy extends beyond the sacred groves to shape the elves' entire worldview. If they can limit themselves in the holy places, choosing traditional materials and methods out of respect, why not apply similar thinking everywhere? Why wound the earth unnecessarily anywhere? Why use force and violence in making when patience and understanding can achieve the same ends? And so the sacred limits, while most strictly observed in the holy groves, influence elven culture throughout their territories. They mine sparingly, if at all. They avoid techniques that scar the land. They prefer materials that come from natural cycles over those that must be torn from the earth. The sacred places set the standard, and that standard ripples outward, shaping everything the elves do. As evening comes to the sacred grove, the last light filters through the ancient trees, touching the simple structures of wood and stone, glinting off the flint blades and bone tools, highlighting the absence of metal, the presence of only what is natural and right. An elf sitting in this space, preparing for evening meditation, feels the harmony of it, the way everything belongs, the way the sacred limits have preserved something precious. They think about those limits not as restrictions but as freedoms. Freedom from the burden of always taking, always using, always consuming. Freedom from the guilt of wounding what they love. Freedom to exist in some places as guests rather than owners, as visitors rather than users, as witnesses to the sacred rather than masters of it. And as darkness deepens and stars appear through the canopy overhead, the elf settles into meditation, their simple tools of wood and bone and stone beside them, their heart quiet, their spirit aligned with the ancient peace of the grove. They breathe in the sacred air, breathe out gratitude, and rest in the knowledge that some things are more important than convenience, that some places are worth protecting through restraint, that the sacred limits are not diminishment but a path to something greater, something deeper, something that can only be found in the spaces we choose to leave untouched, unmarred, whole. The forest elves do not worship distant gods in far-off heavens. Their sacred beings are near, immediate, woven into the very landscape they walk through each day. The spirits they honor dwell in the trees and streams, in the stones and shadows, in the slow turning of seasons and the patient unfolding of growth. And chief among these sacred presences are the ancient trees, being so old and wise that the elves approach them not as plants to be used but as elders to be consulted, as teachers to be learned from, as members of their community who happen to exist on a different timescale, who experience the world in ways that are foreign yet somehow understandable. There are trees in the deep forest that were ancient when the elves' great-great-grandparents were born. Trees whose roots reach down through layers of soil and stone laid down over millennia. Trees whose branches have sheltered countless generations of birds and squirrels and elves. Trees that have weathered storms that destroyed entire sections of forest, that have survived droughts and floods and fires, that have simply endured while everything around them changed and changed again. These trees, the elves believe, are more than simple plants. They are conscious, in their own way. Not conscious as an elf is conscious, not thinking in words or images or linear thoughts, but aware nonetheless. Aware of the forest around them. Aware of the slow passage of time. Aware, perhaps, of the patterns that repeat across centuries, the cycles that shorter-lived beings can never quite see. And some elves can communicate with these ancient ones. Not through speech, for trees have no voices in the conventional sense, but through something deeper than words, something that happens in the quiet spaces of the mind, in the feelings that arise when you place your hand on bark and simply listen, in the subtle knowings that emerge when you sit at the base of an ancient trunk and open yourself to whatever wisdom it might share. This communication is not easy or straightforward. It requires patience, stillness, receptivity. An elf seeking to commune with an ancient tree might spend hours, even days, simply sitting in its presence. They quiet their own thoughts, slow their breathing, let go of their human-scaled concerns and urgencies. They sink into a different sense of time, tree time, where a season is barely a moment and a century is a comfortable span for observation. And gradually, if they are patient enough, if they are open enough, something begins to happen. It might start as a feeling, a sense of vast patience and deep-rootedness. It might be an image that appears in the mind, not quite a vision but more substantial than imagination. It might be a knowing, a certainty about something that arrives complete, without explanation, like memory from a life you never lived. The messages from ancient trees are rarely specific or urgent. Trees do not concern themselves with the day-to-day matters that preoccupy shorter-lived beings. They perceive in broader strokes, in patterns that play out over decades or centuries. An ancient oak might communicate a sense that the winter to come will be harsh, not from any weather prediction but from deep knowledge of cycles, from the memory of similar patterns in the distant past. A great willow growing beside a stream might convey understanding about water, about how it moves and changes, about the relationship between river and forest that plays out over generations. A towering pine on a mountainside might share something about endurance, about standing firm when storms come, about the strength that comes from flexibility rather than rigidity. These communications are treasured by the elves. They seek out the ancient trees when they face difficult decisions or when they need perspective that transcends their own limited experience. A clan uncertain about whether to stay in their current territory or move to a new one might send representatives to commune with the eldest trees, seeking wisdom about patterns of change in the forest, about cycles of abundance and scarcity that might inform their choice. An individual elf struggling with personal dilemmas might sit with an ancient tree and find, in the tree's vast patience and deep peace, a new way of understanding their situation. The tree does not offer advice in the human sense, does not say, do this, or don't do that. But its very presence, its embodiment of patience and endurance and acceptance of change, can shift perspective in profound ways. The elves honor these ancient trees with ceremony and care. They never wound them unnecessarily, never take bark or branches without pressing need and profound gratitude. They tend the area around them, clearing away threats, protecting them from harm. They bring offerings, not because the trees need gifts but as expressions of respect and relationship. Water during drought. Songs during the long nights of winter. Simple presence and attention, the gift of being witnessed and honored. Some ancient trees become pilgrimage sites, places where elves travel from distant parts of the forest to seek wisdom or healing or simply to be in the presence of such profound age and consciousness. These visits are quiet, reverential. Elves approach slowly, with bowed heads, with hearts open. They might stand with palms pressed to the bark, feeling the slow pulse of sap, the patient breathing of the great being before them. They might circle the trunk, noting every detail, every pattern in the bark, every place where branches join the main trunk, every scar from old wounds, every sign of the tree's long history. They read this history like a book, seeing in the trees form the story of its survival, the challenges it has faced, the ways it has adapted and endured. And sometimes, in these moments of deep attention and respect, the tree responds. Not always. Not predictably. But sometimes. And when it does, when that vast, slow consciousness acknowledges the small, quick elf before it, the experience is profound, sometimes life-changing. To be recognized by such a being, to feel your presence noted by an awareness that spans centuries, is to understand in a new way what it means to be part of something larger than yourself. Beyond the ancient trees, the elves recognize spirits throughout the forest. The stream spirit, embodied in the flowing water, in the sound of current over stone, in the life that clusters along the banks. The stone spirits, slow and patient as the trees but even more ancient, their consciousness measured in geological time, their awareness touching on the bones of the earth itself. There are spirits of place, of particular clearings or valleys or hillsides, presences that are not quite individual beings but rather the accumulated consciousness of a location, the sum of all the life and death and growth that has happened there. The elves feel these presences and honor them, understanding that each place has its own character, its own mood, its own slow awareness. And there are the seasonal spirits, the presences that emerge and recede with the turning of the year. Spring as a rushing forward energy, an urge to grow and bloom and begin. Summer as fullness and abundance, ripe and warm and giving. Autumn as a drawing inward, a harvest of what has been given, a preparation for rest. Winter as deep quiet, as the pause between breaths, as the darkness that makes light possible. The elves mark the passages of these seasonal spirits with ceremony. The spring equinox brings celebration, welcoming back the growing energy after winter's rest. The summer solstice honors the peak of light and warmth. The autumn equinox acknowledges the turn toward darkness, the necessary letting go. The winter solstice celebrates the return of light, the promise that spring will come again. These ceremonies are simple but profound. The elves gather in sacred groves or beneath ancient trees. They sing songs passed down through generations, songs that honor the spirits, that acknowledge the sacred presences that share their world. They make offerings appropriate to the season, seeds in spring, flowers in summer, fruits in autumn, evergreen boughs in winter. And they listen. They open themselves to whatever the spirits might communicate. Sometimes this is a feeling, a sense of blessing or approval. Sometimes it is guidance, subtle but clear, about how to live in harmony with the season's energy. Sometimes it is simply presence, the profound experience of feeling connected to forces much larger than yourself, of knowing that you are not alone in the world but surrounded by consciousness, by awareness, by beings that, though different from you, are nonetheless real and present. The youngest elves are taught from early age to recognize and respect these spirits. They learn to greet the trees, to thank the stream, to acknowledge the presence of place and season. What might seem like superstition or pretense to outsiders is, to the elves, simply courtesy, the manners appropriate to a world that is alive and aware at every level. As children grow, some show particular aptitude for communication with the spirits. These individuals might become spiritual leaders in their communities, druids or shamans or wise ones who serve as intermediaries between the quick world of elves and the slow world of ancient consciousness. They spend years developing their skills, learning to quiet themselves enough to hear what the trees whisper, to feel what the stones remember, to understand what the spirits communicate. But even those without special gifts maintain relationship with the spirits. An ordinary elf might have a favorite tree they visit regularly, a particular stream they feel drawn to, a spot in the forest where they go when they need peace or perspective. These relationships, cultivated over years or decades, become sources of strength and wisdom, anchors in a world that can feel uncertain or chaotic. On quiet evenings, an elf might sit beneath their tree and simply rest there, feeling the tree's presence like the presence of an old friend. They don't need to communicate anything specific. They don't need to ask for wisdom or guidance. They simply sit, and the tree stands, and there is companionship in that, communion in the shared stillness, connection in the simple fact of being together. And as night deepens and the forest settles into darkness, as the sounds of day creatures give way to the sounds of night, the elf remains a while longer, feeling the trees' slow breathing, sensing the presence of spirits all around, the streams singing in the distance, the stones holding their ancient silence, the seasonal energy that colors everything at this time of year. They feel held by all of this, embraced by consciousness that extends far beyond their own small awareness. They are not alone. They have never been alone. They are part of a community that includes not just other elves but trees and streams and spirits, all of it woven together in a vast web of relationship and mutual awareness. And when they finally rise and return to their dwelling, they carry that connection with them. They sleep knowing that the ancient trees stand watch, that the spirits continue their slow dreaming, that the forest breathes around them, conscious and aware and alive. And they rest in that knowledge, peaceful, grateful, held always in the embrace of beings far older and wiser than themselves, spirits of the forest who have been here since the beginning and will remain long after, patient and enduring, slow and wise, forever part of the sacred mystery that is the living world. There are moments in the forest when the world seems to shimmer, when the boundary between what is and what might be grows thin and permeable. In these moments, if you know how to look, if you understand what you're seeing, you might catch a glimpse of something extraordinary. The forest as it exists beyond the physical, a layer of reality that overlaps with the one we walk through but exists at a slightly different frequency, vibrates to a slightly different song. The elves call this the spirit forest, and they say that some among them have learned to walk there, to slip between the worlds like stepping through a doorway made of mist and memory. This is not something all elves can do. It requires a particular sensitivity, a certain openness to the subtle currents that flow beneath the surface of ordinary reality. Some are born with this gift. Others develop it through years of meditation and practice, learning to perceive what others miss, to sense the places where the veil between worlds grows gossamer thin. The spirit forest is not a different place, exactly. It occupies the same space as the physical forest, existing in the same locations, following the same contours of land and water. But everything there is more vivid, more alive, more saturated with meaning and presence. The trees in the spirit forest are the same trees that grow in the physical world, but they are also more truly themselves, expressing their essential nature without the limitations that physical form imposes. An ancient oak in the physical world might be impressive, might command respect with its size and age. But the same oak in the spirit forest is magnificent beyond description, its presence so powerful it's almost overwhelming. You don't just see it, you feel it, you sense the vast consciousness that dwells within it. You understand in a way that transcends words exactly what this tree is, what it has been, what it means to the forest and to the world. Colors in the spirit forest are deeper, more luminous. The green of leaves seems to glow from within. The brown of bark holds depths you could fall into. The blue of the sky beyond the canopy is so rich and perfect it makes your heart ache. Everything is more intensely itself, more real somehow than the muted version that exists in the physical realm. And the forest is populated by presences that are invisible in the ordinary world. The spirits that the elves sense and honor in the physical forest are clearly visible here, taking forms that are sometimes beautiful, sometimes strange, sometimes shifting and hard to focus on. The stream spirit might appear as a flowing figure of water and light, moving with the current, laughing with the voice of ripples over stone. The tree spirits stand tall and luminous, ancient beings of wood and wisdom, their forms overlapping with but not quite matching the physical trees they inhabit. To step into the spirit forest is to step into a world that is more awake, more aware, more alive than the ordinary realm. Everything there notices you. The trees turn their attention toward you, not physically but in ways you can feel. The spirits regard you with curiosity or welcome, or, if you do not belong there, with suspicion or hostility. You are not an invisible observer in the spirit forest. You are a participant, acknowledged and noticed by everything around you. The elves who learn to walk between worlds do so for various reasons. Sometimes it is simply to experience the spirit forest, to commune with it more directly than is possible in the physical realm, To stand in that place of heightened awareness and drink in the beauty and presence that surrounds you, there is a profound spiritual experience, one that can sustain you through long seasons in the ordinary world. But there are practical uses too. The spirit forest can serve as a refuge when the physical world becomes dangerous. An elf fleeing enemies might slip sideways into the spirit realm and simply vanish from physical sight. They continue walking through the same forest, but now they are in the layer that others cannot perceive, cannot follow into. They are safe, hidden in plain sight, invisible to those who cannot sense the worlds beyond the physical. Travel in the spirit forest is also different. Distances seem to compress and expand in ways that don't follow physical logic. A journey that would take days in the physical forest might be accomplished in hours in the spirit realm, not because you move faster but because space itself is more fluid there, more responsive to will and intention. An elf who needs to reach a distant part of the forest quickly might step into the spirit realm and find the journey shortened in ways that are difficult to explain but nonetheless real. But walking between worlds is not without risk. The spirit forest, for all its beauty, is not entirely safe. The presences that dwell there are powerful, and not all of them are friendly to physical beings who venture into their realm. There are spirits that are curious about flesh and blood visitors, that might seek to keep you there, to prevent your return to the physical world. There are places in the spirit forest where the energy is so intense that a physical being cannot endure it for long without harm. And there is the risk of losing your way. The spirit forest, while it mirrors the physical forest, is not identical to it. Paths that exist in the physical realm might not exist in the spirit realm. Features might be shifted or altered. What looks like a familiar grove might lead you somewhere entirely unexpected. An elf who is not careful, who does not maintain clear intention and awareness, might find themselves unable to return to the physical world, lost in the spirit realm, wandering between worlds without anchor or direction. This is why the ability to walk between worlds is not taught casually. Young elves who show aptitude for it are trained carefully by those with experience. They learn first to simply perceive the spirit forest while remaining firmly in the physical realm, to see the shimmer and sense the presence without crossing over. They practice this for years, developing their perception, learning to distinguish between the worlds, understanding what they're seeing and feeling. Only when they have demonstrated sufficient control and awareness are they taught to actually step across. And even then, their first crossings are brief and closely supervised. An experienced walker stays near, ready to pull them back if they become disoriented or frightened. They cross for only moments at first, just long enough to stand in the spirit forest and feel its reality, then immediately return to the physical realm. Gradually, over more years of practice, they learn to stay longer, to walk farther, to navigate the spirit forest with confidence. They learn the landmarks that remain constant between worlds, the features they can use to orient themselves. They learn to recognize the signs that indicate danger, the shimmers and distortions that warn of places best avoided. They learn to communicate with the spirits they encounter, to show respect, to ask permission before venturing into areas that are particularly sacred or powerful. And they learn, most importantly, how to maintain their connection to the physical world even while walking in the spirit realm. They develop techniques, mental anchors, ways of ensuring that they can always find their way back. Some carry physical objects that serve as touchstones, items from the physical world that help them remember where they came from and how to return. Others use memory, recalling physical sensations and experiences so vividly that they remain tethered to the physical realm even while exploring the spiritual one. The moment of crossing itself is hard to describe to someone who has never experienced it. It's like stepping sideways through reality. The world doesn't change dramatically or suddenly. It's more like your perception shifts, like you're suddenly seeing wavelengths of light that were always there but that you couldn't perceive before. The forest around you is the same forest, but now you see it truly, see the spirits that dwell in it, feel the energy that flows through it, experience the consciousness that permeates every tree and stone and breath of air. There's usually a moment of disorientation, a brief vertigo as your mind adjusts to perceiving more than it's accustomed to. Colors might seem too bright at first, overwhelming. The presence of spirits might feel intrusive, too intense. But for those with a gift, this disorientation passes quickly, and what replaces it is a sense of coming home, of stepping into a version of the forest that feels more real, more right, than the physical realm ever did. Some elves who learn to walk between worlds find themselves drawn more and more to the spirit forest. They spend increasing time there, returning to the physical realm only when necessary. There are stories of elves who eventually cross over permanently, who choose to remain in the spirit forest, becoming something between elf and spirit themselves, taking on guardian roles or simply dwelling in that heightened realm for the rest of their existence. But most walkers maintain balance, moving between worlds as needed but remaining rooted in the physical realm, in their communities, in their bodies and lives as physical beings. They use their ability to serve their clans, to gather information from the spirits, to access wisdom that exists in the spirit realm, to provide sanctuary when needed. But they return, always, bringing back what they've learned, sharing the insights they've gained, remaining connected to the world of flesh and wood and stone. On certain nights, when the moon is full and the air is still, you might see an elf standing at the edge of a clearing, perfectly motionless, their eyes open but seeing something beyond the physical. They are there but also not there, 1 foot in each world, maintaining presence in both realms simultaneously. They stand as a bridge, a connection point, allowing energy and awareness to flow between the worlds. And then, as you watch, they seem to fade slightly, becoming translucent, becoming more like moonlight than flesh. And then they're gone, stepped fully into the spirit forest, walking now in that realm of heightened awareness and luminous presence. The physical forest holds only empty space where they stood, but in the spirit realm they continue walking, their path taking them through landscapes of wonder and power, through forests more alive than any physical forest could be. And eventually, when their purpose is complete, when they've learned what they came to learn or seen what they needed to see, they will step back. The worlds will shift again. The spirit forest will fade, or rather, will recede back into subtle presence, no longer directly perceived. And they will stand once more in the physical forest, solid and flesh again, their eyes refocusing on the ordinary world. But they carry with them the memory of what they saw, the knowledge they gained, the presence they experienced. And they are changed by it, deepened by it, made wiser by their walk between worlds. And they rest that night with gratitude for the gift they've been given, the ability to see beyond the veil, to walk in realms that most will never know, to bridge the worlds and bring back wisdom from the spirit forest to share with those who dwell only in the physical realm. And as sleep takes them, perhaps they dream of that other forest, that luminous realm where everything is more intensely itself, where spirits walk openly and the trees blaze with inner light, where the boundary between self and other, between physical and spiritual, between the seen and the unseen, grows beautifully, mysteriously thin. When the forest elves speak of magic, they do not speak of bending reality to impossible shapes or commanding forces that violate natural law. Their magic is something quieter, more intimate. It is an extension of their deep connection to the forest, an expression of their understanding of how life flows and connects and communicates. It is not power over nature but partnership with it, a collaboration that allows them to do things that might seem miraculous to outsiders but that feel, to the elves themselves, as natural as breathing. The magic of illusion comes easily to those who have spent lifetimes observing how light and shadow play through the forest. An elf who understands perfectly how dappled sunlight falls through leaves, who knows exactly how mist softens edges and blurs forms, who has watched countless times how distance and vegetation obscure and reveal. Such an elf can learn to recreate these effects, to cast illusions that are not violations of reality but rather gentle suggestions that encourage the eye to see what the elf wants it to see. An elf standing perfectly still might cast an illusion that makes them appear to be a shrub or a young tree. The magic doesn't transform their body, doesn't actually change their physical form. Instead, it creates a subtle shimmer around them, a suggestion to the eyes of anyone looking that what they're seeing is vegetation, not a person. Combined with appropriate stillness and the right clothing, the illusion becomes nearly perfect. A human might walk within feet of the disguised elf and never realize they passed another conscious being. Or an elf might create the illusion of a path where none exists, laying a subtle glamour over the undergrowth that makes it appear clear and inviting, leading enemies away from the clan's true dwelling. Those who follow this false path find themselves going in circles, ending up back where they started, confused and frustrated, never quite realizing that they were following an illusion. These illusions work best when they align with what might naturally be there, when they don't ask the viewer's mind to accept something too far from reality. An elf can create the illusion of a small stream or a patch of brambles, but creating the illusion of a castle or a dragon would be far more difficult, requiring so much energy and concentration that it would rarely be worth the attempt. The elves work within nature's vocabulary, using its language to create their deceptions. The magic of communication with animals is perhaps even more natural than illusion. The elves spend their lives observing creatures, learning their behaviors, understanding their moods and intentions. They know what a deer's ear position means, can read the tension in a bird's body, understand the messages contained in animal calls and sounds. From this foundation of observation and understanding, magic becomes possible. An elf wishing to communicate with a nearby squirrel might first spend time simply watching it, becoming familiar with its particular personality and patterns. Then, quietly, they extend their awareness toward the creature, not imposing their consciousness but offering a gentle connection. If the squirrel accepts, a bridge forms, and suddenly the elf can sense the creature's feelings, its simple concerns and observations. The communication is not in words, for animals do not think in language the way elves do. Instead, it is in impressions, emotions, images. The squirrel might convey a sense of satisfaction about its stored nuts, concern about a hawk it spotted earlier, curiosity about the elf's presence. The elf can send back feelings of friendliness, reassurance, gratitude for the squirrel's awareness. Sometimes the communication becomes more specific. An elf might ask a raven to watch for approaching dangers and warn the clan. The raven, if willing, understands not through words but through shared intention, through the elf's clear desire and the raven's comprehension of what is wanted. The bird agrees not out of servitude but out of relationship, perhaps remembering times when the elves left food for ravens in harsh winter, perhaps simply enjoying the connection with another intelligent being. Or an elf might communicate with a wolf, asking it to lead them to water or to avoid hunting near the elven settlement for a time. The wolf, proud and independent, will agree only if the request seems reasonable, only if it aligns with the wolf's own interests or if there is sufficient relationship and respect between the elf and the pack. This magic requires patience and respect. Animals are not servants or tools. They are other beings with their own lives and priorities. The magic of communication allows for requests, for negotiations, for mutual understanding, but never for control or command. An elf who tried to force an animal to obey would find the magic failing, the connection breaking, the creature fleeing or even attacking in response to the violation. The magic of herbal healing builds on the elves' extensive knowledge of plants and their properties. They know which leaves reduce fever, which roots ease pain, which bark helps wounds heal cleanly. But their magic goes beyond simple herbalism. An elf healer preparing medicine does so with intention and awareness, focusing their will as they work, infusing the preparation with energy and purpose. They might speak to the plant as they harvest it, thanking it for its gift and asking it to lend its full power to healing. As they prepare the medicine, grinding or steeping or mixing, they maintain focus on the intended outcome, visualizing the patient healing, imagining the medicine working perfectly. This focused intention seems to enhance the natural properties of the herbs, making them more effective than they would be if prepared without such care. An elf healer treating a wound might apply a poultice of healing herbs while also placing their hands gently over the injury and willing the body to heal, encouraging the natural processes of recovery, lending their own life energy to support the patient's healing. The magic doesn't create instant miraculous recovery, but it does seem to speed healing, reduce complications, support the body's own remarkable ability to repair itself. There are some ailments that resist even magical healing, and the elves accept this with the same grace they bring to all aspects of life. Death is natural, after all. Not every injury can be healed. Not every illness can be cured. The healing magic can help, can improve outcomes, can ease suffering, but it cannot overcome every challenge. The elves understand this and do not see it as failure but simply as reality, as the natural limits that exist even for magic. Perhaps the most remarkable of the elves' magical abilities is the practice of sense sharing with animals. This goes beyond communication, beyond mere exchange of feelings and impressions. In sense sharing, an elf temporarily experiences the world through an animal's senses, seeing through its eyes, hearing through its ears, smelling what it smells, feeling what it feels. To accomplish this, The elf must first establish deep rapport with the animal, must spend time in communication until a strong connection forms. Then, in a state of deep meditation, they extend their consciousness further, not just touching the animal's mind but actually merging with it partially, allowing their awareness to slip into the animal's body while their own body remains in a trance-like state. Suddenly the elf is soaring with a hawk, seeing the forest spread out below with the incredible visual acuity that raptors possess. Every movement in the undergrowth is visible. The heat signatures of warm-blooded creatures show clearly. The world is a vast landscape of information, every detail sharp and clear. The elf experiences the hawk's joy in flight, its constant awareness of air currents and wind, its predatory focus and fierce independence. Or the elf might share senses with a deer, experiencing the world through that gentle herbivore's perception. The incredible hearing that catches every small sound in the forest. The sensitive nose that identifies threats by scent long before they're visible. The constant alertness, the readiness to flee, the hair-trigger awareness of danger. Through the deer's senses, the elf experiences the forest as a place of both beauty and constant potential threat, understands the vigilance required to survive as prey rather than predator. This ability serves practical purposes. An elf can scout distant areas by sharing senses with a bird, seeing what lies ahead without risking personal danger. They can understand what threats might be approaching by experiencing the forest through a deer's hyper-aware senses. They can locate things by borrowing a fox's keen nose or track someone by seeing through a wolf's eyes. But the practice also serves a deeper purpose. By experiencing the world through different senses, through different forms of consciousness, the elves develop profound empathy for other creatures. They understand more deeply what it means to be a hawk or a deer or a wolf. They lose any sense of superiority over animals, recognizing that each creature has its own form of intelligence, its own way of being in the world that is perfect for its needs. Sense sharing is not without risks. There is always the danger of becoming too immersed in the animal's consciousness, of losing track of your own identity, of forgetting that you have a body elsewhere that you need to return to. Young elves learning this skill are carefully supervised, with experienced practitioners ready to pull them back if they seem to be losing themselves. There are also ethical considerations. The elves never force this connection on unwilling animals. They ask, always, and accept if the creature refuses. And they are careful not to impose their will on the animal while sharing its senses, not to try to control its actions or override its own decision-making. They are guests in the animal's consciousness, observers, and they maintain that respectful distance even while experiencing intimate connection. All of these magical abilities, from illusion to communication to healing to sense sharing, share common characteristics. They work with nature rather than against it. They require relationship and respect rather than force or domination. They demand patience and practice, developing gradually over years or decades of study and experience. And they enhance rather than replace the natural abilities and knowledge that the elves already possess. An elf's magic is not a shortcut or a cheat, not a way to avoid the hard work of understanding and skill. It is an extension of that understanding, a deepening of that skill, a way of taking what they already know and do and expanding it into something more. The illusion works because the elf already understands light and shadow perfectly. The animal communication succeeds because the elf has spent years observing and learning animal behavior. The healing magic enhances herbs that are already genuinely medicinal. The sense sharing builds on an existing foundation of empathy and connection. And so as evening comes and an elf sits quietly in their dwelling, perhaps they reflect on the magic they worked that day. The illusion that helped them avoid an uncomfortable encounter. The conversation with a robin that warned of a storm approaching. The healing poultice they prepared for a clan member's injury, infused with intention and care. The brief time they spent sharing senses with a hawk, soaring high above the canopy, seeing the forest from that breathtaking perspective. These magical acts are woven seamlessly into the fabric of their life, not separate or special but simply part of how they exist in the world, part of how they maintain their deep connection to the forest and all its inhabitants. The magic is not power over nature but partnership with it, not control but collaboration, not dominance but dance. And as they settle into sleep, the elf rests easy, knowing that tomorrow will bring more opportunities to work this gentle magic, to communicate and heal and perceive in ways that honor the deep relationships they have cultivated. They sleep peacefully, their consciousness perhaps brushing briefly against the awareness of nearby animals, sharing a moment of connection even in dreams, always part of the vast web of life that is the forest, always in relationship with the magic that flows through everything. The forest elves are not warriors by nature or preference. They do not seek conflict, do not glory in battle, do not maintain armies or arsenals. But neither are they helpless or naive. They understand that the world contains those who would harm them or their forest home, and they have developed sophisticated methods of protection. These methods begin not with violence but with awareness, not with confrontation but with misdirection, not with weapons but with the forest itself turned subtly against those who would intrude where they are not welcome. Long before an outsider realizes they have entered elven territory, the elves know about them. The clan maintains constant gentle vigilance, not through posted guards or watchtowers but through relationship with the forest and its inhabitants. The birds and animals who live alongside the elves serve as an early warning system, their alarm calls and unusual behaviors noticed immediately by those who have spent lifetimes learning to read these signs. A raven's particular cry might alert an elf that something unusual approaches from the north. A deer crashing through the undergrowth in panicked flight suggests a predator, or perhaps a human moving clumsily through the woods. Squirrels chittering with agitation point toward the location of the disturbance. The elves notice all of this, piece together the information, and begin tracking the intruders long before those intruders have any idea they're being observed. Elves move silently through the canopy or slip like shadows through the undergrowth, always staying out of sight, always watching. They assess the intruders carefully. How many are there? Are they armed? Do they seem to be simply passing through or actively searching for something? Do they move with the carelessness of those who don't know they're in sacred territory, or with the purpose of those who have come deliberately seeking the elves? Most often, the intruders are simply lost travelers or hunters who have wandered into elven lands without meaning to. These people pose no real threat, and the elves' response is measured accordingly. They do not reveal themselves. They do not attack. Instead, they begin a careful campaign of gentle discouragement, using the forest itself to convince the intruders that they should leave. It might begin with sounds. Strange calls that echo through the trees, unlike any animal the travelers have heard before. Not threatening, necessarily, but unsettling, reminding them that they are in an unfamiliar place where unknown things dwell. The sounds might seem to come from multiple directions, creating a sense of being surrounded, of being watched, even though nothing can be seen. Or lights might appear in the distance, will-o'-the-wisps that dance between the trees, drawing attention, inviting curiosity. Some travelers might follow these lights, thinking they indicate a settlement or camp ahead. But the lights lead them in circles, or guide them gently but inexorably back the way they came, depositing them at the edge of elven territory before winking out and disappearing. The elves might encourage wildlife to make their presence known in ways that unnerve intruders without actually threatening them. A traveler might find their camp surrounded by wolves at night, yellow eyes gleaming in the firelight, the pack sitting in perfect silence, just watching. The wolves make no move to attack, show no aggression, but their presence is deeply unsettling. Few travelers will stay in a camp that is clearly in the middle of wolf territory, especially when the wolves behave in such an unnatural, coordinated way. Or birds might gather in unusual numbers, perching in the trees around the intruder's path, silent and watchful, creating a sense that nature itself is paying attention, that the travelers are being judged by forces they cannot see or understand. This subtle pressure, this sense of being unwelcome without quite knowing why, drives most people to leave simply because staying feels increasingly wrong. The elves might manipulate the path itself, using their magic to create illusions that make the way forward seem blocked or impassable. A traveler might encounter what appears to be a deep ravine cutting across their path, forcing them to turn back or go around, inadvertently heading away from elven settlements. Or dense thorns might seem to grow across the trail, discouraging progress in that direction while leaving other paths that lead away from elven territory, conveniently clear. These methods work remarkably well. Most intruders, faced with strange sounds, mysterious lights, unusual animal behavior, and paths that seem to close ahead while opening behind, conclude that this part of the forest is unwelcoming or even haunted. They leave, often quickly, and they do not return. They might tell stories later about the strange woods they passed through, the eerie experiences they had, and these stories serve the elves well, adding to the forest's reputation as a place best avoided. But sometimes the intruders are more persistent or more purposeful. Perhaps they are hunters tracking valuable game and unwilling to give up the chase. Perhaps they are adventurers seeking the fabled forest elves and determined to find them. Perhaps they are soldiers or bandits with hostile intent. For these more determined intruders, the elves escalate their methods while still avoiding direct confrontation if possible. The forest itself might begin to seem actively hostile. Small accidents start happening. A branch that seemed solid gives way under a climber's weight. A path that looked clear reveals hidden roots that trip and tangle. What seemed like solid ground turns out to be marshy and difficult to cross. These obstacles slow the intruders, frustrate them, make their journey increasingly difficult without ever directly attacking them. The elves might steal or hide equipment, making critical items disappear in the night. Weapons might vanish from where they were carefully placed. Food supplies might be found scattered and spoiled. Water skins might develop mysterious holes. The intruders begin to feel that they are struggling against the forest itself, that continuing is becoming more trouble than it's worth. In extreme cases, when intruders prove both persistent and clearly hostile, the elves might resort to stronger measures. They might use sleep-inducing herbs blown as powder through the intruders' camp at night, leaving them to wake hours later confused and groggy, their supplies missing, clear tracks leading back the way they came. The message is unmistakable: leave now while you can still do so on your own feet. Or the elves might reveal themselves briefly, appearing suddenly in overwhelming numbers, surrounding the intruders but not attacking, simply standing there in perfect silence, making it clear that the intruders are vastly outnumbered, that they have been watched all along, that continuing would be unwise. This show of force, combined with the opportunity to retreat with dignity, usually convinces even determined intruders to abandon their purpose. Throughout all of this, the elves' preference is clear. They would rather not fight. They would rather not kill. Every life, even the life of someone who means them harm, has value, and ending it is a serious matter that should be avoided if any other option exists. The elves use deception, misdirection, fear, and intimidation not because they lack the ability to fight but because they prefer not to, because they understand that violence creates ripples that spread far beyond the immediate conflict. But the elves are not pacifists who will allow themselves to be harmed rather than defend themselves. If all gentle methods fail, if intruders prove both hostile and persistent, if they begin to threaten the clan or the sacred places of the forest, then the elves will fight. And when they do, they fight with the same skill and efficiency they bring to everything else. Arrows fired from hidden positions. Ambushes sprung from the shadows. The forest itself becoming a weapon, with every tree and root and shadow hiding an enemy the intruders never see until it's too late. But this is always the last resort. The elves count it as a failure if they must resort to lethal force, a sign that they did not employ their other methods skillfully enough, that they did not find the right combination of deterrents to drive the intruders away. They prefer the quiet victory, the one where the intruders leave on their own, convinced by the forest's strangeness or difficulty that continuing is not worth the effort. The children learn these defensive methods as they grow, taught both the techniques and, more importantly, the philosophy behind them. They learn to track and watch without being seen. They learn to create illusions and strange sounds. They practice communicating with animals to coordinate defensive efforts. And they learn the escalation, when to use which methods, how to read intruders and respond appropriately to the level of threat they pose. But more than the techniques, they learn the values. That life is precious, even the lives of enemies. That violence is a failure, not a victory. That the goal is not to defeat intruders but to protect the clan and the forest, and that these goals can usually be accomplished without bloodshed. That strength includes the strength to show restraint, to choose not to harm even when you have the power to do so. On quiet nights, the elves who serve as watchers might sit together and share observations about the forest's boundaries, about who has come near and how they were deterred. They talk through the methods that worked and those that didn't, always refining their approach, always looking for better ways to protect without harming, to defend without destroying. And they rest easier knowing that their forest home is protected by layers of subtle defenses, by their own vigilance and skill, by the cooperation of the animals who share their territory, by the forest itself which seems to respond to their intentions and help turn away those who should not be there. They have created a place of safety not through walls and weapons but through awareness and relationship, through working with the forest rather than trying to dominate it. As sleep comes, the watchers relax their vigilance only slightly. Even in dreams, part of their awareness remains attuned to the forest, listening for the alarm calls, sensing disturbances, ready to wake if needed. But mostly they rest peacefully, trusting in the systems they have built, the methods they have refined, the philosophy that guides all their actions. And the forest breathes around them, quiet and protected, its boundaries guarded by those who love it enough to defend it, but who love life enough to defend with the gentlest means possible, who understand that the truest strength is knowing when not to use force, who have learned that the best victories are those where everyone walks away alive, where even enemies are given the chance to leave unharmed, to go back to their own homes with nothing worse than strange stories and an inexplicable reluctance to ever return to those mysterious woods where the forest itself seems to watch and wait and quietly, persistently, encourage all intruders to simply leave. The forest exists as an island of ancient green in a world that grows increasingly different. Beyond the boundaries of elven territory, the world changes, transforms, becomes something that the forest elves find difficult to understand and even more difficult to accept. There are humans building their settlements, cutting swaths of forest to make room for farms and roads. There are miners digging into mountains, seeking metals and gems, leaving wounds in the earth that will take generations to heal. There are loggers felling ancient trees for timber, reducing in hours what took centuries to grow. And there are other elves, cousins perhaps, but cousins who have chosen a different path. City elves who dwell in grand settlements of stone and metal, who have turned away from the forest and toward civilization. High elves who live in towers and palaces, who practice elaborate magics and pursue knowledge that seems, to the forest elves, disconnected from the natural world. These other elves should be kin, should be allies, but instead they are often sources of tension, reminders of paths not taken, embodiments of choices the forest elves cannot understand or accept. The conflict with human settlers is perhaps the most persistent and painful. Humans expand, always expand, their populations growing, their need for land and resources ever increasing. They move into the forests, building homesteads, clearing land for crops, grazing livestock in meadows that were once wild. And with each farm, each village, each road cut through the forest, the wild spaces shrink a little more. The forest elves watch this expansion with growing concern and sorrow. They see the cleared land and know it was home to countless creatures who are now displaced or dead. They see the stumps of felled trees and feel each loss like a personal wound. They see the straightened streams and drained wetlands and know that the forest's health is being compromised, that the intricate web of relationships that sustains the woodland is being torn apart. They try, at first, to communicate. They send emissaries to the human settlements, trying to explain that the forest is not empty land waiting to be claimed but a living community, that the trees are not just timber but beings worthy of respect, that there are limits to what can be taken without causing irreparable harm. But these messages are rarely understood, rarely heeded. The humans see only valuable resources, only land that could be productive, only opportunity for growth and profit. Sometimes treaties are negotiated, boundaries agreed upon, promises made that the humans will expand no further, will leave certain areas untouched. The forest elves agree to these treaties with hope, wanting to believe that peaceful coexistence is possible. But the treaties are almost always broken, sometimes by design, more often through simple disregard as new generations of humans arrive who feel no obligation to honor promises made by their grandparents. And so the tension grows. The forest elves increase their defensive measures, working harder to drive away those who venture too deep into their territory. They use their magic to make the forest seem more dangerous, more inhospitable than it truly is. They spread stories through nearby human settlements, tales of people who entered the deep woods and never returned, of strange creatures and malevolent spirits, hoping that fear will accomplish what negotiation could not. But fear breeds its own problems. The humans begin to see the forest elves not as neighbors to be respected, but as threats to be eliminated. Warriors and adventurers come seeking to rid the forest of its dangers. The conflicts escalate from avoidance to confrontation, from warning to violence. Blood is spilled on both sides, creating grievances that fuel further conflict, beginning cycles of retaliation that can last for generations. The loggers present a different kind of challenge. They come not to settle but to extract, to take the ancient trees and leave. The forest elves see this as perhaps even worse than settlement, for at least settlers have some relationship with the land they claim, some investment in its continued existence. But loggers take and move on, leaving behind devastation, clearings littered with stumps and slash, streams choked with debris, the forest wounded in ways that will take centuries to heal if it heals at all. The elves fight this logging with every tool they possess. They sabotage equipment in the night, making axes go dull impossibly fast, causing saws to break, ensuring that wagons lose wheels at crucial moments. They create illusions that lead logging crews in circles, make them believe they've already harvested an area when they haven't, confuse their sense of direction until they give up and leave in frustration. Sometimes they resort to more direct action. A tree marked for cutting might fall in the wrong direction, endangering the loggers enough to make them reconsider. A camp might be visited by wolves or bears, the animals acting with an intelligence and coordination that suggests they're being directed by unseen forces. The loggers begin to believe the forest itself is against them, and in a sense, they're right. But stopping the logging entirely is nearly impossible. There is too much demand for timber, too much profit to be made, too many humans willing to take the risk. The best the elves can often accomplish is to slow the process, to make certain areas too difficult or too dangerous to be worth the effort, to preserve at least some groves of ancient trees while accepting with heavy hearts that others will fall. The miners are perhaps the most alien to the elves' way of understanding. To deliberately dig into the earth, to tunnel deep into the mountain's bones, to extract metal and stone and gems with no thought for the violence being done to the land. This seems to the elves to be madness, a fundamental disconnection from the natural world that they cannot fathom. They avoid mining areas when possible, finding the scarred landscapes and poisoned waters too painful to witness. But when mines threaten to encroach on elven territory, when the digging reaches deep enough to affect the underground streams that feed the forest, when the poisons from the mining begin to leach into the watershed, then the elves must act. Their methods against mining are often the most aggressive, for they see mining as perhaps the worst violation, the deepest wound. They might collapse tunnels, create the impression that the mine is unstable or cursed, make the work so dangerous that even profit-hungry humans will eventually decide it's not worth the cost. They have been known to flood mines by redirecting underground streams, to cause cave-ins that bury equipment, to do whatever is necessary to stop the digging before irreversible damage is done. But even as they struggle against these human encroachments, the forest elves face another source of tension from an unexpected direction. Their own distant kin, the elves who have chosen different ways of living. The city elves and high elves seem to the forest elves to have betrayed something fundamental. They have turned away from the wild, from the deep connection to nature that the forest elves believe should define what it means to be elven. They live in buildings of stone and metal, surrounded by artifice, removed from the cycles of the forest. They pursue magics that bend reality rather than working with it, that impose will rather than collaborating with nature's existing patterns. When city elves or high elves visit the forest elves often regard them with suspicion and even disdain. These cousins speak with refinement about the forest, admire its beauty in aesthetic terms, but they don't truly understand it, don't feel it the way the forest elves do. They are tourists in a landscape that should be home, observers of something they should be part of. The city elves, in turn, often view the forest elves as primitive, as stubbornly clinging to old ways when better alternatives exist. They don't understand why anyone would choose to live in the wilderness when comfortable cities are available. They see the forest elves' lifestyle as unnecessarily difficult, their rejection of civilization as foolish pride or simple backwardness. The high elves might be even more condescending, viewing the forest elves as lesser cousins who never developed the sophisticated culture and powerful magics that the high elves value. They might study the forest elves as anthropological curiosities, writing scholarly works about forest elf culture without ever truly understanding or respecting it. These divisions between different elven peoples create pain and confusion. Should they not be natural allies, sharing common heritage and, presumably, common values? But the forest elves find they often have more in common with the forest itself, with the trees and animals, than they do with these elven cousins who have chosen stone over wood, artifice over nature, civilization over wild. Occasionally, there are attempts at bridge building, at finding common ground. A high elf scholar might come to study with the forest elves, and in the process, begin to understand what they've been missing, begin to feel the pull of the wild, the rightness of living in harmony with nature. A forest elf might visit a city and find, to their surprise, that not everything about civilization is wrong, that there are kinds of beauty and connection possible even in places built of stone. But these successes are rare. More often, the visits reinforce the divisions, confirming each group's belief that the other has chosen poorly, that they themselves are living the right way while their cousins have gone astray. And so the forest elves find themselves somewhat isolated, caught between a human world that threatens to destroy the forests they love and elven cousins who have already turned away from the wild. They maintain their boundaries, defend their territories, preserve their way of life against pressures from all sides. It is exhausting, sometimes. It is discouraging, often. The world seems to be moving in directions they cannot follow, changing in ways they cannot accept. But they endure. They continue living as they always have, maintaining their connection to the forest, passing on their traditions to their children, believing that their way of life has value even if the wider world cannot see it. They hold tight to what they know is true, that the forest is sacred, that the wild has worth beyond what can be extracted from it, that living in harmony with nature is not primitive but profound. On quiet nights, when the immediate threats seem distant and the forest feels secure, an elder might gather the young ones and speak to them about these tensions, about the conflicts that define their relationship with the outside world. The elder speaks not with anger or hatred but with sadness, with regret that things must be this way, with hope that someday, somehow, the humans and their elven cousins will understand what the forest elves have always known. And the young ones listen, and they understand that they are inheritors not just of a way of life but of a struggle, of an ongoing effort to preserve something precious in a world that increasingly does not value it. They feel the weight of this responsibility, but they accept it, knowing that they are guardians of something worth protecting, keepers of wisdom worth preserving. And as sleep comes to the forest, as the elves settle into their homes and the night creatures begin their quiet stirring, there is a sense of determination mixed with the peace. Yes, there are conflicts. Yes, there are threats. Yes, the world outside the forest often seems hostile or simply incomprehensible. But here, in this green space, in these ancient woods, there is still beauty and connection and a way of life worth defending. And they will defend it, gently when possible, forcefully when necessary, but always, always holding to their values, remembering what truly matters, staying true to the forest and to themselves, no matter what pressures the outside world brings to bear. There is a particular kind of patience that comes with living for centuries. When you have seen 300 summers turn to autumn, when you have watched the same trees grow from seedlings to giants, when you have witnessed empires rise and fall while the forest endures, you begin to understand time differently. What seems urgent to those who live only decades becomes, to the forest elves, merely a moment in a much longer story. And this perspective, this long view, shapes everything about how they respond to the challenges they face. When a forest is cut, when land is cleared, when humans build their settlements in what was once wild woodland, the immediate impulse might be rage, might be despair, might be the desire to strike back immediately and forcefully. But the forest elves, with their centuries of experience, with their deep understanding of natural cycles, respond differently. They plant trees. They scatter seeds. They wait. Because they know something that shorter-lived beings often forget. Nature is patient, and nature always, eventually, reclaims what was taken from it. An elf who is 300 years old remembers when the clearing that now holds a human village was dense forest. They remember the trees that grew there, remember playing in those woods as a child. They watched as humans came, as axes fell, as the forest was pushed back. They felt the pain of it, the loss, the grief. But they also remember other clearings, other human settlements, now long abandoned and overgrown. The forest returned, the wounds healed. They have seen this cycle repeat many times across their long life. And so when faced with a new clearing, a new settlement, a new wound in the forest, they do not necessarily respond with immediate violence. Instead, they consider the long view. This settlement, how long will it last? 50 years? 100? That is nothing to an elf who will live 500 years or more. They can afford to wait. They can plant trees at the edges of the cleared land and watch as those trees slowly, year by year, begin to encroach. They can wait for the inevitable time when the human settlement fails, when resources run out or people move on or some disaster befalls the place, and when that happens, the forest will be ready to return. This strategy requires a patience that most beings cannot fathom. To plant a tree knowing you will not see it reach maturity for decades. To scatter seeds with the understanding that the forest you are helping to create will not fully emerge for a century or more. To work on a timescale that extends far beyond your own lifetime, trusting that others will continue what you have begun, that the work will persist even after you are gone. But this is how the forest elves think. They do not see themselves as individuals working alone but as part of a continuous chain of guardians, each generation adding to the work of those who came before, each elf planting seeds that future elves will tend. They are not trying to win immediate victories but to ensure the forest's survival over centuries and millennia. And in that context, even devastating losses become temporary setbacks, wounds that will heal given enough time. An elder elf might walk the boundaries of cleared land, their face thoughtful rather than angry. They study the soil, considering what will grow well here. They note which direction the prevailing winds blow from, understanding that seeds from the remaining forest will naturally spread in certain directions. They look at the human settlement and assess its stability, its likelihood of lasting. Are these permanent structures built to last generations, or temporary buildings that will decay within decades? Are the humans taking good care of the land, or depleting it in ways that will force them to eventually abandon it? And based on these observations, they make plans. Not plans for next month or next year, but plans for the next 50 years, the next 100. They identify the places where trees can be planted that the humans are unlikely to disturb. They select species that grow relatively quickly, that will provide food and shelter for animals, that will help rebuild the forest's ecosystem. They begin the slow work of reclamation. Sometimes they work in secret, planting at night, placing seeds where they will go unnoticed until they sprout. Other times they work openly, if the humans are friendly or at least neutral. An elf might even offer to help a human farmer plant trees along their property line, suggesting it will provide windbreaks or shade, not mentioning that these trees are the beginning of the forest's patient return. The elves also understand that they can help nature along, can speed the process of reclamation. They might encourage certain animals to nest near cleared areas, animals whose behavior will help spread seeds. Birds who eat fruits and drop seeds in new locations. Squirrels who bury nuts and forget some of them, creating new oak trees. The elves work with these animal allies, providing food or shelter in strategic locations, guiding the natural process of reforestation without forcing it. And they wait. Years pass. The trees they planted grow slowly but steadily. The seeds they scattered begin to sprout. The forest's edge creeps forward, inch by inch, reclaiming ground. And if the human settlement endures, if it proves more permanent than expected, the elves adjust their plans. They continue tending the trees at the boundary, creating a living wall of green that at least contains the cleared area, that prevents further expansion, that maintains the forest's presence even in diminished form. But often, the settlement does not endure. Human communities are fragile in ways that forests are not. A few bad harvests, a plague, an economic collapse in distant cities that somehow affects this small village, a simple gradual migration as young people leave for opportunities elsewhere. The reasons vary, but the outcome is often the same. Eventually, the humans leave. The buildings stand empty, and the forest, which has been waiting patiently at the edges, begins its triumphant return. At first, it is grass and weeds that colonize the cleared land, fast-growing plants that can take advantage of the open space and disturbed soil. Then shrubs and bushes, species that prepare the way for larger plants. Then young trees, pioneer species that can tolerate full sun and poor soil. And as these early colonizers grow, they shade the ground, drop leaves that enrich the soil, create conditions that allow slower growing but longer-lived trees to establish themselves. The elves watch this succession with satisfaction, helping where they can but mostly just allowing it to happen. They thin the pioneer species where necessary, making room for oaks and maples and other trees that will eventually form the mature forest canopy. They introduce seeds of understory plants, wildflowers and ferns that will create diversity and provide food and shelter for insects and small animals. They work with the forest as it heals itself, guiding but not controlling, assisting but not forcing. Decades pass. The abandoned settlement becomes harder and harder to recognize. The wooden buildings rot and collapse, their timbers becoming homes for insects and fungi, feeding the soil as they decompose. Stone foundations become covered with moss and vines. Roads and paths vanish under leaf litter and growing vegetation. And the forest returns, not exactly as it was before, but returned nonetheless, green and alive and whole again. An elf who planted trees at the edge of this clearing a century ago might return now and walk through forest where the human village once stood. They touch the trunks of trees they planted as saplings, now mature and strong. They notice with pleasure the diversity of plants that have established themselves, the birds nesting in branches, the small mammals making homes in the undergrowth. The forest has healed. The wound is closed. And the elf feels a deep satisfaction, not the triumph of victory but the quiet joy of work completed, of patience rewarded, of trust in natural processes vindicated. This is the long view in action. This is the power that comes from living for centuries, from understanding that most problems, given enough time, resolve themselves, that nature has its own wisdom and momentum that will prevail if you simply give it space and time to work. The forest elves do not need to defeat every threat immediately because they know that time itself is their ally, that patience is more powerful than force, that the forest's ability to reclaim and renew will outlast any human settlement, any period of destruction. But the long view applies to more than just physical restoration of cleared land. It shapes the elves' entire approach to conflict and change. When faced with aggressive humans or hostile policies, they do not necessarily rush to immediate confrontation. Instead, they consider whether this threat will persist or whether time and circumstances will diminish it without their direct intervention. Human leaders who hate the elves and seek to destroy their forest will age and die, replaced by new leaders who might have different priorities. Economic conditions that make logging profitable might change, making the forest more valuable standing than cut. Diseases or disasters might reduce human populations, easing the pressure on wild lands. The elves know that if they can simply survive, if they can protect the most critical areas and preserve their core territory, time itself will likely resolve many of the problems they face. This does not mean they are passive. They still use all their skills to defend themselves and their forest. But they do so with a strategic patience, understanding that they do not need to win every battle, only to ensure that they and the forest endure long enough for circumstances to change in their favor. The long view also brings a certain peace to the elves, a protection against despair. When they see devastation, when they witness losses that would crush the spirit of shorter-lived beings, they can hold in their minds the understanding that this is temporary, that healing will come, that the forest has survived worse and will survive this too. This perspective does not eliminate grief, but it provides context, it offers hope, it reminds them that even the darkest times eventually give way to recovery and renewal. Elders teach this perspective to the young, helping them understand that patience is not weakness but strength, that the long view is not passivity but strategy. They share stories of clearings that became forests again, of threats that seemed existential but proved temporary, of times when waiting proved wiser than fighting. They help the young ones develop the patience that will sustain them through centuries of life, the ability to work toward goals they may not live to see completed, the faith that their efforts, combined with those of others across generations, will ultimately succeed. And as night deepens and the forest settles into its ancient rhythms, as the elves prepare for sleep in their living homes, they carry with them this long view, this patient perspective. They think about the seeds they planted today that will grow for decades before maturing. They consider the threats they face and how those threats might change or diminish over years and generations. They trust in the forest's resilience, in nature's patient reclamation, in the slow but inexorable power of life to return, to heal, to endure. And they sleep peacefully, knowing that they are part of something that extends far beyond their individual lives, that the work they do today contributes to outcomes that will emerge decades or centuries hence, that the forest they love and serve has time on its side, has patience deeper than any human can understand, has the ultimate victory already assured because nature, given time, always wins. Always endures. Always finds a way to return, to reclaim, to renew. The forest breathes around them as they dream. And in those dreams, perhaps, they see the future forests growing in places now cleared. See the trees they planted today grown tall and strong 100 years hence. See the forest whole and healthy and eternal, surviving all threats through the simple, profound power of patience, of time, of the long view that sees beyond immediate struggles to the inevitable triumph of life, of green growing things, of the wild and sacred forest that has always been and always will be home.